through this, what we've got going on, what we've done in this past year. First of all, I can't commend y'all enough for the resiliency, creativity, and professionalism every one of y'all showed. We had no idea that this market was going to be so robust, and we all realized how to do business and how to accomplish the real dream of homeownership. And I have to say, and I've told my everybody that works at Campbell and Brannon, I have reminded them that buying a new house and moving into a new house and having a new house in the midst of a pandemic has really been kind of the brightest spot for a lot of people in the entire thing. That was the highlight and the bright moment of being in the midst of a pandemic and having something really positive happen in their lives. So
I agree. When you're supposed to quarantine in place or shelter in place, it's nice to have a nice place. So
and I think a lot of people realized that. And a lot of people realized that with those low interest rates and that they were going to be at home a little more, that is probably, we're just also very thankful, and we appreciate so much the loyalty and y'all having come to us so much and trusted us this past year. And I can't thank you enough for it. And I look forward to seeing you all in this upcoming year. We have great optimism about what the year brings ahead. Believe it or not, in addition to doing closings last year, we actually came up with some pretty cool things. And I wanted just to remind y'all of all of these tools that we've created that are supposed to make your life easier and better and make you look better and make everybody that you work with think that you are working with and have a great top-notch team and all these great resources. So I'll begin by showing you the very first thing we did this year, which was to put a button on our opening page of campbellandbrannon.com where we have our fee calculator. And if you have a buyer that is interested in knowing what their fees are going to be, then you can at any time, 24/7, go in, put in the purchase price. If you know the loan amount, you can put in the loan amount, and it will calculate for you all the fees that will be charged. And it doesn't show, of course, the lender fees because we don't know what they are, but it does show all of the transfer taxes, intangibles taxes, title insurance, title, our fees, the recording fees, and all of those associated fees. So if you put in those amounts, then it will print this for you, which is the format that the lender would provide to a buyer. And the cool thing about this is you can actually email this directly from our website to your buyer, to the lender, to whoever it is that you want to send it to. And you can also customize your message to whoever that may be. We do have in the very top box, it has the various counties in Georgia. You don't necessarily have to put that in because currently there is no fee difference amongst the various counties. But if there is a fee difference or ever becomes one, then it would be important for you to put that in, but there is not one right now. So then you go to the option of the transaction type, and you can either print it in our easy to understand Campbell and Brannon format, or again, you can print it in the CD format which allows you to email that directly to whoever it is might be.
Yeah, I like this format too, because it does give you a total charge so that people can clearly understand what is it going to cost for us to do the closing portion of it.
Right. I think it's a great tool, and you can do that at any time of day or night. And then the other really cool thing that we have on our website now is our seller net sheet. So very often your seller wants to know what they don't really care much about the transaction, except they want to know what they're going to be taking home. And sometimes that's a difficult thing for you to contemplate. So the seller net sheet just asks you the relevant questions that allows you to calculate what the seller's bottom line is going to be. And it also allows you it does the tax prorations, and it does, so it's depending upon the closing date. And if they can give you fairly accurate payoff amounts, you can tell your seller what their bottom line is going to be. And this is another cool thing that you can print out and send to your seller. You can have that in your listing agents, or in your listing appointments, or you can just do it at any point in the process. If someone provides an offer, you can show them what their bottom line would be based on the offer that was just presented. So
yeah, I really like this feature, Camille. It's pretty sharp because you could also use it to compare with what the closing attorney, whether it's us or even someone else, what they're charging, and just making sure that the taxes are done right, the payoffs, the commissions. I think it's pretty simple math, a really easy software to use. I would definitely recommend it. And then you can always email it to them too, which I like as well.
Yeah, it's so cool. It'll take you just a few seconds to do it, and it makes you look so knowledgeable. So we're really excited about that. The next resource that we love is our Utility Connect. So Utility Connect is a free service. It is something that you can point your buyers and your sellers to, and at the minimum, they can request their mail forwarding be done online just through this platform. If they do want to use or are curious about every utility that provides service to that particular address, the person can input what utilities they're interested in. And for example, we know that some gas companies don't provide gas to every location. Some electric companies don't provide electricity to every location. So if you put in the address of the location, it will tell you the utility providers that provide services to those areas. So
I thought this was pretty helpful. I had a client last year who the seller never lived in the house. They were out of state. And so you couldn't ask the seller what internet providers are available, but you could go on here and it would tell you AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon was available. And there's no charge for it. It's just a free service that any of your clients could use.
So it does all the utilities, except it will not do, as you could probably guess, our beloved water, because as you know, water is a little more difficult transaction here in the metro area. So it will not do the water service for you, but it will do all of these other services. And you can even order moving supplies and all that. I have no idea where they get those from. So it's not coming from Campbell and Brannon, but it's got a lot of resources available and it is free. So there's no downside to getting that done. So we're really excited about that.
What about Breakthrough Broker, Camille? That's another one that you added this year that I think is pretty cool.
Okay, so y'all, Breakthrough Broker is what I would call, particularly for Ansley, it's going to be an inspirational tool. You have a very strong brand standard, and of course, what you have to produce needs to be consistent with that luxury brand, and we totally understand that. Breakthrough Broker does offer a lot of print options, which I do not think you'll take advantage of because it won't be consistent with your brand standards. But what it does do is just give you some great resources and inspirational tools. So he's showing you a few of these things, but 10 habits for becoming a better salesperson, creating a profitable real estate sales funnel, 90 days to be a better manager. I mean, it has some really awesome tools that will inspire you. I mean, I would recommend that it's free. If you go through our website and sign up through our website, we pay for y'all to have the premium service. So if you go through our website, you can engage with Breakthrough Broker as much or as little as you want to. You don't have to use its resources, but what we have found is that the people that started to use their resources used them a lot and love them. So I would recommend you sign up, and if you have any spare time, you go and just kind of play around in that platform, because it will give you some ideas that you can use and that will inspire your success. And then who would have known that 2020 would have been a year of growth, but we are really, really lucky that we have some opportunities come to us in the Gwinnett location, in the Gwinnett area. So now we have opened up a new office in Gwinnett at Sugarloaf, and that picture just showed you it is consistent with our Campbell and Brannon closing experience, we have Scott Gasley, who is our attorney in and the Gwinnett in that Sugarloaf location, and Jessica Tripp. And they are the two attorneys there. Scott will eventually be opening up our office in Brazelton, which we're currently working to get done. Oh, Jessica's, so we just got her picture
they updated the picture.
Yeah, so Jessica got her picture made, I guess, a few days ago. Her first day here was January the 4th, and she's adorable, and she's got great experience. She's not new to being a closing attorney. She's just new to Campbell and Brannon, and we're really excited about both Scott and Jessica joining our team. So we've got some really great things that have happened in this past year that set us up for real great success next year. Please use the tools that we've gotten for you, because we want to help you. Don't forget attorneys at campbellandbrannon.com. I think many of you use it, but if you don't, that is also a good resource for you if you have a fairly straightforward question or need a legal description or something like that. And I think that y'all be safe. Y'all,
Thank you, we all appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this, Christian and Zach and Scott. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2021. We very much appreciate you. Please know that. Thanks.
Thanks, Camille.
Thanks for the
morning, guys. Sorry to cut you off there, Zach. How are you, Zach?
Doing great. Good morning. Just wanted to thank Camille.
It's good today.
Well, yeah, everything's great. Wanted to thank Camille for the State of the Union address. So thanks for filling everybody in on what we got going on. I wanted to mention on that seller net sheet as well, just I can only imagine what a great tool that would be for a listing presentation, just to be able to walk in and talk to your sellers and say, hey, want to see what you might be able to make after we close this for you. I think that would be a really, really cool thing for y'all to have in your quiver.
No, that's a good point. Actually, Zach, this week I had a scenario where we weren't able to get back to the seller right away. They wanted a settlement statement, I think like 3 weeks ahead of closing. And we didn't have a payoff at that point, but the seller kind of knew what the payoff was going to be.
Right.
And as a way to kind of diffuse the seller's anxiety, the agent just went on our website, plugged in the information that the client gave her, and was able to print out an estimated settlement that was incredibly accurate. So it was a pretty cool way to deliver for the seller and keep the anxieties pretty low and manageable, which was
That's
awesome.
Good. We like keeping anxieties low and manageable.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Camille.
Y'all have a great class. Bye-bye.
So some of you have already asked about making sure that you're signed in and that you understand this format. And so let me take a minute to explain that to you all. This may be different than what you've experienced previously with Zoom. It's what they call their webinar format. You had to be registered. You've all registered. And what that really means for you is if you're sharing a computer, if you guys are both looking at the same screen, I need you to be on separate computers. So that's what being individually registered with Zoom. So go ahead and make sure you're doing that. If you need to log out and get back in, that is not going to be a problem. But if you do that, if you are kicked out, log right back in, because we need you to be logged in for a total of 3 hours. Zoom is tracking your attendance. So if we open the class up a little earlier, we're gonna keep the class open late. So as long as you hit that minimum 180 minutes, that's the next expectation. And then number 3, you're gonna complete the online application for the CE credit. And let me show you what that looks like. It's pretty sharp. Let's see here. I think it's right here. So it's campbellandbrannon.com, and you cannot find it by just searching through our website. You actually have to type it in directly, but it's campbellandbrannon.com/learn. And you get to this site, you scroll down, it talks about what this class is and what the school is. So you're going to select 2021 contract changes. You're going to put your name, you're going to put your license number, your email. And that was another thing we added, Camille, which was you had them have a shortened email domain if they don't want to use the Campbell and Brannon domain. So you can use either one for any of us. But you're going to tell us that we did the greatest job since the last online class you took. And then you're going to give us a little bit of feedback. We'd love to have your take on it and some sort of direction going forward, and then submit it down at the bottom. You should get a confirmation email that you've submitted it. I'm going to go over this several times, but that's the third step. You'll go to this website, you'll fill out the information, and then we'll follow up with you. If I don't have it, if I need you to fill it out again, I will make sure to reach out to you.
Hey, Christian, I think we're getting some feedback that they can't see that screen. Did you pull that up?
Right. There it is. So here's the screen. It's campbellbrandon.com/learn. If you want, you can put this into your browser now. But again, you'll select the class, the name. I don't have a license number, so you'll have to put your own email, and then you'll tell us that we did great. Submit it down at the very bottom. Thank you for reminding me about that. So we'll go over that several more times.
I'd also like to mention that the last time I did a CE class for Ansley was about a year ago. Right after that class, I was rushed to the hospital to have an emergency appendectomy. So I'm really hoping not to have a similar experience this year. So I'm crossing my fingers that I'll
no black clouds, Zach. Goodness gracious. I, however, still have my appendix, so I'm okay.
All right, walking that tightrope.
So here's how the class is going to show. This is kind of the format that you can expect. We're going to break it into 3 main sections. The first 2 sections, they kind of work the same way. We're going to go over the changes. In fact, the first section specifically, there are the consumer brochures and the brokerage agreement. So obviously very important to go over that. We have a case study about the brokerage agreement. Section 2, we'll start that after about, the first hour goes by. We'll start that. We're going to talk about the contract. So F201, and then some of the other contracts. We'll talk about the disclosures, including the community association disclosure. And then again, we'll have a case study or a war story. And then finally, section 3, we've got 2 specific case studies that I wanted to make sure we hit as well. So I hope you'll enjoy this class. We spent a lot of time working on it, so it should be a really good one. But Zach, consumer brochures, what generally, tell me, what do you think about these consumer brochures? Are they helpful? What is your impression of them?
I think they're great. I think they are packed with awesome information. And kind of like the contract, it seems like most buyers and sellers aren't reading these things. So that's a shame. I don't really know how y'all can inspire your buyers to be reading these things, because they're just packed with awesome information that are really going to help y'all and keep y'all from having to explain things over and over and over again, because they have great resources that are actually in print that your buyers can take a look at it. But I know that your buyers are just kind of inundated with information, and this is a kind of an unfamiliar process for a lot of them. And so, they've got so many things coming at them from so many directions. It's hard for them to filter what is and what isn't important. So, I hope that y'all are able to share with one another tactics you've had for inspiring your buyers to read these things. I know that some agents in the past have had their buyers have to DocuSign or initial that they've taken a look at these brochures. But of course, that doesn't guarantee that a buyer or seller has actually read these things. And we're going to see as we go on, there's some new protections that are put in the contract for y'all and for us, where it states that a buyer or seller has read some of these documents. But Christian, I don't know, any thoughts you have on inspiring someone to actually pick these things up and dig into them?
I mean, Jennifer mentions in the chat feature, and definitely use the chat feature, guys. That's a great way for you to interact with us. But she says, we like to have our clients initial the first page and then add them to the listing or buyer's engagement agreements. I think that's great, but just the way Zach and I are teaching this class, I would almost do a Zoom if you're not able to meet with them in person, but you do a Zoom and you just run through it. You're like, hey, I know it's been, you've sold before, you've bought before, maybe you haven't, but this is a great information. And honestly, just like Zach said, I think GAR hit a home run on the education piece of these contracts. They've gone above and beyond on every one of these forms to educate your client in setting expectations. And Zach, I don't know about you, but to me, one of the most powerful words that I have in my toolbox is normal. So if I can tell a seller, this is what's normal about, in this case, coming soon, because coming soon is a fairly new thing. Well, you can't expect a seller to ever have done that before. Maybe they don't really know what coming soon means. So in this case, they set expectations. They establish what's normal. If you look at the third paragraph here, it says, while in coming soon status, your broker cannot show your property to any potential buyers or allow other real estate companies to view the property. It cannot do any public facing advertising. I mean, to me, that was an education to me. I didn't realize that about coming soon. Should an offer be received during the coming soon phase, sellers should be aware that their property has not been fully exposed to the marketplace and may want to consider a delay in accepting the offer until the property has been fully marketed via a MLS or until the broker makes the property available for all buyers to consider purchasing. You know, we saw a lot last year where someone would put a property on the market, they'd accept an offer, assuming, you know, they got really, really close to the list price. And then 2 weeks later, they realize, oh my gosh, I think I may have left 30 grand on the table because the market changed so drastically. So if you're going to use the coming soon, use it at its full advantage. You know, get that 21 day, I think it's 21 days, but get it out there for 21 days and don't accept offers until everyone's had a chance to book an appointment and see it for themselves.
Yeah, y'all, there's a note on this slide about a lawsuit that I think spurred this change in a lot of states, wherein, you know, there was a coming soon sign in the yard in a house in California. A buyer rode by, saw it, made an offer, and, you know, the seller was so excited about this. Wow, we haven't even listed the property technically yet, and we've got an offer. And they went under contract and they sold the property for that, you know, with that first buyer. And then a couple of weeks later, you know, they were talking to somebody else who was interested in the property, who said, gosh, we would have paid you so much more money for that property had we known it was for sale and had it been in the, you know, in the MLS system. And the seller then went after their agent saying, listen, you know, we thought you were doing us a favor when you put that coming soon sign in the front yard, but it turns out you actually acted to our detriment. I know it got you, the agent, a quick sale and lined your pockets, but for us, the seller, we could have done a lot better had you actually gone forward, put this on the MLS, and spent more time actually marketing this property to a bigger market. So caused a lot of consternation there. So to Christian's point, this is super easy, compact, digestible information for a seller to read, to say, hey, this is a reason why I may not want to go under contract during the coming soon process. I may want to go ahead and let it get out into the bigger pool of the MLS.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but people are always going to look to blame someone for their misfortune. So this is a great way to stop, take a breath, and make sure your client and you are on the same page. And so look at some of the other things. The property marketing and coming soon is new on this form, but the other stuff's been there already. Be realistic in setting a sales price, what that means, understanding your disclosure obligation. I think that's huge. And then prepare the property for showing. You know, basically, again, GAR hit a home run. They're trying to educate your client so that they can't come back, or they won't come back and say, why didn't anyone explain that to me? The other thing they added was, I think, pretty helpful and probably a natural addition given what's happened over the last couple of years, but capturing and sharing media. So buyers may take photos and capture video of a property to help them remember the specifics of that property. It is a convenient way for buyers to review the properties they are considering purchasing. Just take those first two sentences. Why is GAR even doing this? They're putting in there, they're trying to set the standard. They're setting you up. They're saying that this is normal. This is what buyers will do, as opposed to a seller who says, why are they doing that? You know, and not understanding it. So keep reading. We'll say, in addition, they may share it with other decision makers who are unable to attend the showing. There's also the possibility that an agent may be asked to take additional photos or capture a video walkthrough of a property on behalf of a buyer. Sellers are advised. So they've spent the first 3-4 sentences just talking about what is normal. And then the last sentence, they're trying to give you the advice. Sellers are advised that any visible personal property, which may be in the property, may be photographed or contained within a video, and should take any precautions they deem necessary. I think it's pretty cool. I think that's very helpful information. If you took a lot of effort and the seller is very concerned about, you know, people knowing what kind of cars they have in the garage, well, when there's a walkthrough, when there's a showing, make sure those cars are not in there either, because once they take a picture, the damage is done. It could be on Facebook in a matter of seconds. So
Speaking
I
of the
think this
damage
is a
is
good
done,
addition.
Christian, I actually had an agent that was in a house about 2 years ago showing it to their potential buyers, and the agent texted me a picture of a buyer's bedroom or a seller's bedroom, and their bedroom bedside table with a marital aid on the bedside table. So that was hilarious, and something that unfortunately, I'm sure I was not the only person that this agent sent that picture to.
Oh, no.
So that was a hilarious thing, and a good reminder that you want to keep things out of sight, not only for the people that are coming into your house, but any pictures they may be taking and then disseminating as well. So
oh my gosh,
a good reminder.
So here's the rest of this, the other paragraphs that are already on this form from last year. Beware of cyber fraud. GAR added all that last year to many of these forms. It's obviously still very much an issue. And then they discuss the value add of working with the realtor. And Zach, Campbell, and Brannon kind of pushed this last year, and we did an analysis and tried to compare all the services that we add that's kind of going above and beyond compared to our competition. And GAR's trying to do the same thing for you guys. So, it's important for your clients to take a second, educate themselves. I mean, it's a 3-page document for a seller. I assume it's the same for the buyer. We'll go over that next. And then the other thing, Zach, they actually have one of these for leasing. They have it, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, and just kind of setting those expectations. I think the leasing one is excellent because not a lot of people understand leasing, and it does a really great job.
I don't understand leasing, so I need to take a better look at that, Christian.
Yeah, so Lane, I'm just going to look at the chat feature real quick. So offers can be made at any time, but we can't show or market the property. We have seen offers on properties that are sight unseen. She was responding to the coming soon thing. But remember, we're only due a commission on an active property. The contract has a start date, unless Zach or Christian feel differently. I think it depends. If you're the one putting the contract together, you're part of that contract. Yeah, I think Lane is more the expert in that regard than I am.
I have a sidebar to Lane right now, actually, so I'll let y'all know how that pans out.
Okay, thank you, Zach. So the next form is CB13, the buyer brochure. Protect yourself when buying real estate or real property. So they added 2 new paragraphs on this one as well. Thoroughly investigate the property, and then they have one also on termites. Now, thoroughly investigate the property. Zach, Witt and we taught this class about a week ago, and we spent, 20 minutes on this particular section. I don't think we need to do that, but he was pretty adamant that it should be normal to not stop at the inspection, that every buyer that, luckily in this market, everyone's getting an inspection. Very rare circumstances will they forego getting an inspection. But then Witt is saying, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, you get the inspection, and if the inspector points out something about the roof, about the HVAC, about the foundation, well, then your immediate reaction should be, let's hire HVAC specialists. Let's get contractor out here, look at the air conditioning, look at the furnace, and give us an invoice or verify or deny on what the inspector laid out. What kind of inspections would you see normally? Say something in your neck of the woods, Zach, in town. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, Christian, I mean, I want to backtrack just a second to say that I think inspections must be just one of the most difficult part of an agent's job, whether you're a listing agent or a selling agent, and you're walking that fine line between, wanting the inspector to do a great job, especially if it's an inspector that you recommended, want that inspector to do a great job and really, figure out what's wrong with the property on behalf of your client, balanced against you want the contract to close, right? So it's a really tough thing there, I think. And so I can tell you that when I've bought properties in the past, I've relied on my agent to say, hey, this is not a big deal. We don't need to worry about this. This is something that you can get a handyman out and fix, or, you can even not even really have to worry about this necessarily versus, hey, you've got 2 HVAC systems. One of them's dripping water and one of them has rust all over the fan outside. Like the inspector pointed this out. We need to get a little closer look at this. Let's get an expert out here. So I can tell you that with that kind of stuff, I am counting on my agent ordinarily to tell me what's a big deal and what's not a big deal. I have decided over time that primarily I would rather get money in the form of closing costs so I can do the repair myself rather than having a seller make the repair.
Yeah.
If that's feasible, and if it's not such a big, big repair that it's going to, cost $30,000 or $40,000 in closing costs, which a lender probably isn't going to allow.
Yeah, and to that point, Zach, the thing that I want to make sure we do differently in 2021, one of my big points is not putting on your amendment to address concerns, not referencing your inspection report. I think what I would prefer, and may not always be the case, but if you can't just take money, if you can't just get a credit or a reduction of the purchase price, and you actually do have to have the seller perform a repair, that you shouldn't be referencing back to the inspection report. I don't think you should be saying, per the inspection report on page 3 dated, January 1st, I think, seller shall, make the repairs as deemed necessary by a licensed professional. I would prefer instead, say in this scenario, it's a roof repair, that the inspector lays out something on the roof, you hire a roofer to give you an invoice or a scope of work, and then you say, seller shall repair the items listed on that invoice attached as Exhibit A, no later than at seller's sole cost and expense. Something like that. That's what I love. I love seeing it so line itemed so that the seller knows these are the 3 things they needed to have the roofer do, as opposed to it being a little more vague, which most inspection reports are.
I totally agree, Christian. And one of the biggest problems we've seen over the past year, especially, is that, good Lord, these contractors are so busy and it's so hard to get them out to do this work before closing. So a lot of times we're then altering these amendments around the time of closing to say, the seller or the vendor maybe couldn't get there in time, or maybe that we're just going to cut a check at closing directly to that vendor. So to Christian's point, we're going to get an invoice from that vendor. We're going to cut a check. It's going to be on the closing statement. We'll send that check directly to the vendor. That way the vendor can go ahead and get that work done as soon as they practically can post-closing, and we're not holding up the closing for everybody.
Yeah, and JD makes a great point. She says, can we remind agents they do not need to tell clients if an inspection item is a big deal or not? I agree with that. What our job is to point them out and then set them in the right direction, and they get to make that decision. I actually had a closing, Zach, a couple months ago where the buyer's agent, now that's another thing, they've changed the name of who's whom, which I love, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Zach, this agent made a very big point of almost convincing his clients not to get a survey. And Zach, you and I are on the same page. I think buyers need to get surveys, and if they choose not to, that's on them. But actually convincing them not to get a survey and being so opinionated about it could do your clients some real harm, especially if they would have otherwise gotten one. Anything like that pinpoint for you? I mean, what are the things that you think a buyer should always have?
A few things on that, Christian. Number one, there is some really good explanation in the buyer brochure about getting a survey. And so I feel like agents are so well trained to say, you need to get a survey. And then sometimes the buyer will say, well, why do I need it? And some agents will say, well, I don't really know. I just know I'm supposed to tell you to get a survey. So please get a survey. There's a good explanation of that in the buyer brochure. I've got a little 1-pager I'll send Elaine about why a buyer should get a survey. But Christian, to your point, and chasing back to one of your questions earlier, what's something that we see a little, problems on a little bit more in town is survey issues all day, every day. It's just crazy. The biggest problem I see is that the city does not know where their pipes are. But
City of Atlanta, gotta love it.
If there is a pipe and it's on your property and the city needs to get to it, they're going to get to it, whether it's under your lawn, your garage, your house, your pool, and they're going to exercise easement rights regardless of whether or not they have a recorded easement on that property whatsoever. And that's one of the hardest things for me to explain to a buyer or to a seller who's found themselves in the situation of figuring out they have a pipe that they didn't know about, is how can the city come in and exercise easement rights when they don't even have a recorded easement? Well,
I don't have a great explanation on that, except they do. And they do it all the time. We see it all the time. It ain't going to stop. So a recorded easement is nice when I see it, but it doesn't really mean that much to me if I don't, because if I see a survey come across and it has a pipe on it, I got to treat that pipe as if an easement is on that property, whether or not there's a recorded easement or not. It also goes to the point of who you hire to do that survey. And I know that this has been a major cause of consternation for a lot of you agents over the past year, especially because it seems like the good surveyors are busy and hard to get out there. And I totally get that. Even if a survey comes back post due diligence, you're still going to get a lot of protections from a title perspective if something does pop up, and you may still be able to get on the contract as well.
So Christy mentions in a chat to us, it says in North Carolina, the closing attorney asks the buyer directly if they want a survey. They explain the importance of it and will even order it. That's true. And in Florida, that's true as well. But that's very different in Georgia for one main reason. The lenders don't require it in Georgia because the title companies will give the lenders survey protection. So in Georgia, it's not a title requirement. It's entirely on the buyer's side of whether they want to pay for it or not. And typically what I see is, right now, most surveys are $500, $600, $700 minimum, something like that. And if you have a buyer that's buying a $250,000 house, that's a big chunk of change that maybe they're not comfortable spending. And so you say, look, I know they're expensive. Here's the benefits. Let's look at the brochure. Let's talk about it. If you have questions, call Zach. Let's make sure we make an informed decision about this. But then on houses that are on the higher price point, I'd say anything over $500,000, I think your expectations should be that a buyer will always get a survey, because an extra $700 on a $500,000 house and $1 million house, I think that's just a natural thing. And a buyer, if they're going to say no, it's got to be because they have other information or they're making an informed decision about it.
Hey, Christian, I am buying a piece of property.
Congratulations, Zach.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it.
Closing attorney?
Very excited about it. I'm shopping around right now. But I don't want to pay for a survey. And I just found out that my seller has a survey from 2017. Cool for me to just use that survey, right?
Well, we would prefer you get your own, right? That's the scenario. Now that survey from 2017, a couple of things I would ask. One, who ordered it? So, who has the protection of that surveyor? It's your seller. It's not your buyer. Your buyer has no recourse in the event the surveyor made a mistake, or that something was wrong with it. Only the seller would in that scenario. What's happened since 2017? Did they get that survey to add a fence, or because a neighbor added a fence, or they added a pool? Does the survey show that? And then, the last one is who did the survey. That's a big one on there. And, what are the buyer's concerns? Zach, we typically see a survey being ordered for one of two reasons, either just general due diligence, or they're actually trying to verify, can I put in a pool? Can I put in a fence? And if you're trying to buy this house so that you can have a pool and spend $100,000 on it, do you think you need a $500 survey? I think you do.
Y'all, one of my biggest nightmare situations ever was a property in Garden Hills. A buyer was buying it, paying all cash for it. It was vacant. There was a reason that it was vacant, or that it was an unapproved lot. Buyer was going to buy it, pay all cash, build a house on it for his daughter so she could live there and go to Georgia Tech. Post due diligence, but prior to closing, he decided to get a survey. The survey came back pre-closing, fortunately for him, and it showed about 80% of the property in a stream buffer and floodplain, rendering that property unbuildable. That's why it was unimproved in the first place. That buyer did not close. He did lose his earnest money, and this was a time where you could actually go after a defaulting buyer for a little bit more than the earnest money. So he lost his earnest money and more, but fortunately did not end up closing on that property. But
that was an example. Whether or not a property is in a stream buffer or a floodplain is not a title matter. So if the survey comes back post due diligence and it turns out that your property is in a stream buffer or a floodplain, or it turns out that there's a pipe running right through the middle of the property, and this is important, not under any current improvements, but just through the middle of the back of the property, not underneath anywhere, but where you'd like to put your pool, that's not going to be something that can get you out of the contract if you're post due diligence. So we had a question in the chat earlier about, do we have a stipulation that can protect a buyer for a survey coming in post due diligence? Absolutely. We do. So does GAR. Lane, I think that you have a couple of those that we've written over time. If you need me to resend them again, you can. But GAR, I think, has 2 of these right now in their special steps section that you can use as well that we think are great. And unfortunately, this is not a one size fits all stipulation for what happens if a survey is coming in post due diligence. It really has to be tailored to your exact situation, what it is you're looking for, the temperature of your seller, the temperature of the market, are there any backups in play, all that kind of good stuff. So we would love for you to take a look at those GAR steps, see if they fit your situation. If not, we've got some steps that we can share, I think, that Lane has. And if not, and if that doesn't fit, get with us and we'll see if we can put something together for you that will work for everybody.
Yeah, and remember, not all GAR steps are created equal. There is one that's out there that I don't know, Zach, if it's still in the GAR list, but some people still have it if you've been doing real estate for a long time. And it says that in the event buyer orders a new survey and it's different, I don't remember the exact terminology they use, but if it's different from the one the seller has provided, buyer can terminate. And that is not a great step. As Zach mentioned, if you got a survey, it came in right before closing, and there was a title issue in that survey, like an encroachment issue or something of those nature, maybe a building line interference or something like that, the buyer's going to have some recourse there because it is a title issue. But if more specifically, you've been spending the last 90 days going from house to house looking for one with a pool, well, you need a stip that says, in the event buyer cannot get a pool of such and such side due to issues shown on a survey, buyer may terminate. That's something very specific. It should be something a seller would accept, and it's something that protects your buyer. Yeah, so it's just a good option. If you look at what the brochures are right below what Zach was pointing out on get a survey for the property, they have one that says make sure that an undeveloped lot can be developed. Is it buildable? That's a great one, Zach. I like that one.
Yeah. 2 other little things on this. Christy asked a question on the chat of, is this a concern all over Georgia or just in Atlanta?
All over. Everywhere.
I would say all over. I would say we see the biggest concentration of problems within the city of Atlanta. Yeah. I've seen it in Sandy Springs, Marietta, Alpharetta. I can go on and on in the places that I've seen it. I think the biggest risk, again, the older the subdivision, the older the property, the older the area, the more risk there is of this, but we still see it in newer developments as well. Absolutely.
The next slide we have on here, I wanted to point out, because it's at the bottom of the new section that they adjusted, but shoddy workmanship and an over-reliance on home inspection continue to plague new buyers after closing. Don't allow an inspection to stop at the first report. Encourage buyers to hire experts to properly diagnose the report. And one thing I want to point out that they have in the last part of this section is in regards to permitting. So let's say the reason your buyer is so in love with this property is that they just added this new back deck, or they just finished the basement and it's just beautiful. Well, one question I might have is, was the work permitted? Because we're not able to kind of dig behind the drywall in most inspections, but was the work permitted and did it get closed out? Did they actually have a closed permit? And I want to show, Zach, if you don't mind, I just wanted to show how I might look for this, at least in my neck of the woods in Cobb County. So cobbcounty.org, cobbassessor.org. It's a great website if you're ever doing a deal in this neck of the woods. Do property search, and Fulton County has something very similar to this, as well as a lot of the other counties. But we're going to actually put in my address. Don't come and stalk me, paparazzi. But this is my address. And the thing that I love about it is they do have a section on here about permits. And so when I bought my house, I looked this up. 2001, the seller installed a permit, has a permit, or installed a deck, has the permit number, it has an amount. I think it may have been the amount of the job. I'm not exactly sure. And importantly, that they closed the permit, meaning not only did the seller get permission from the county to install the deck, but then the county sent an inspector out afterwards and verified that it was done to code, it was done properly. And you would want to see this for anything safety related. So electrical, plumbing, structural, that's kind of the main thing. And on the consumer brochures, they actually have a lot of information on there about what permits are for, and you can go right onto the state website about permitting. But here's the other thing that's really nice before we move on, Zach. If you just click here, you can get a copy of the deed if you ever go to sell the house or something like that, and you can just pull the legal description. As you notice, I didn't have to log in or anything. Cobb's pretty nice for that. Fulton doesn't have that just yet, but that's a wonderful benefit, and I think it could do a big value add, whether you're the seller's agent or the buyer's agent, just making sure there are no open permits or nothing that kind of we couldn't verify otherwise.
Hey, Christian, one other point I wanted to make on that, additions to the property, new construction, anything like that, and surveys. I have had, every once in a while, I'm sure you do too, Christian, I get ready to close a property that's been improved or new construction, and the buyer sends me over to a survey to take a look at and say, hey, the seller just had this survey done earlier this year. So I don't really want to get a new survey, so I just want to rely on this seller survey. Is this cool? And so Christian's already discussed some of the pitfalls of why you wouldn't want to do that. But what I look for is two words.
Okay.
Site plan.
You don't want it to be a site plan, do you?
I don't want it to be a site plan, Christian.
What's a site plan, Zach?
A site plan is the builder or the contractor's plan for where he's going to put the new stuff.
It may even say proposed house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Proposed house, proposed deck, proposed pool, all that kind of good stuff. So it's like, hey, this is really recent. They just got it. So, we just want to use this survey. And I have to say, you can't. Y'all, you just can't. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a site plan and then what's called an as-built survey that comes after that shows that things did not go according to plan. We have had houses get cockeyed. We've had pools double in size from the site plan and go over into the neighbor's yard. I'm not talking about the decking. I'm talking about the pool going into the neighbor's yard. So site plans, as soon as I see that, I scream and I hit the alarm, because it really is a big deal. We cannot rely on a site plan. You cannot rely on a site plan. If you have a new construction property or a property that's been substantially altered, you need to get an as-built survey to show you exactly where things ended up.
As the name implies, an as-built survey is going to tell you where the improvements were actually built. We'll see those on subdivisions. You might actually have an as-built survey for a plat, for a whole subdivision, things like that, where it will show where the sewer lines are, where the manhole covers are, where utilities may have been placed. So yes, huge difference. Sometimes this is a little piece. If you're buying new construction, that builder likely had to have surveys done at multiple times. They initially had like a boundary survey or a topo survey, then they had a site plan, then they had the as-built once the house was completed. It might be in your benefit to ask or negotiate as a part of your contract to have the seller order a survey for you, name in your buyer's name. Because the new construction builders, they might be able to get a really good deal from their surveyor. So not always the case, but you could always throw that in there. Hey, my buyer wants a survey. Would it be possible for the builder, even if we have to pay $250, the builder will get a better rate than the buyer would doing it themselves. Right.
That's great advice.
Next section we have on here, Zach, and I think this one's important, all the brokerage engagement agreements. Zach and we both love this business, but we don't do it for free. It's not a hobby. The only person that gets it for free, Zach, is mom, right?
Mom.
Everyone else pays cash. And that should be your mindset as well. Not, I'm being a little funny, but this is hugely important. And I think one of the things I saw in 2020, and obviously it's continuing to be an issue, is that we kind of gloss over some of the more important parts of the brokerage agreements, things that ultimately cost you closings, cost you money. And my whole point of including a lot of this stuff in this class is to remind you of its importance and to point out the things that we really need to spend more time, not less. And Zach, do you mind if I tell a quick story? I'm just going to do it. In law school, they have a competition called Alternative Dispute Resolution. At least at my law school, they did. And in it, there's one part of the competition where you and a partner, it's obviously just a pretend scenario. You're supposed to be the attorneys and you're meeting with new clients, and they hire actors. Maybe they're actors in the undergrad, but this one time this lady comes in and she's bawling her eyes out, and it's all pretend, but she is in character and she is bawling her eyes out. And she says that her son has been inappropriately touched at school and she's just distraught and she wants to know what her options are. And my partner and I are, freaked out, and we're trying to, be very cautious, but ask good questions and make sure that we have the information. And at the end, we send her away and we express our thoughts with the judge, and we make our conclusion that we'd like to take her on as a client. And the judge failed us immediately, because we failed to ask the difficult question. Can you explain to me exactly what happened? Because I assumed one thing. My partner probably assumed the same, but it was totally possible that this lady was distraught because the janitor pushed her son to the ground, or patted him on the head, or grabbed his backpack. It may not have been what I was assuming, worst case scenario. And so you have that same responsibility. It is not in your interest or your clients to gloss over the important questions, to ignore the gorilla in the room. So that's my diatribe. That's what I'm going to talk about. And now we can talk about what the forms actually mean, how to interpret them. But look at that, Zach, a new name. Do you like the new name?
It's a little long, Christian.
Exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. The important part is they call you a seller broker. I love that.
Yeah.
They also call the other side a buyer broker. So that's pretty cool. I think I'm pretty happy about the change. There's no longer a seller's broker or a
listing broker,
selling agent broker, or a listing agent broker. It's seller broker, buyer broker. So we'll have to kind of retrain our mindset in that regard. But look at section 4, commission. Seller agrees to pay the broker. I think 4A, most of you, that's pretty clear cut. We'll put 6% or 5% or whatever the number is. We'll put that in 4A. 4B, what you're going to pay the cooperating broker. And Gar spent a good amount of time kind of adjusting this portion of it, because they've added a couple sections, which we're going to talk about next, Zach, on kind of what happens if there is a co-op agent, what's going to be paid to them, and how are we going to split these costs. Zach, you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. You want to kind of give me your mindset on this and what we talked about?
I'll do my best, Christian.
It's a tough
as
one.
much as we talked about this yesterday, I'm still scratching my head on it a little bit. In item C here, new section, there may be circumstances where seller's broker shall not pay the cooperating broker the commission referenced above. The circumstances are as follows. Yeah, Christian and I, we've thought of a couple of things. Maybe a for sale by owner situation where you're not paying a second agent on that. What was the other one we thought of, Christian?
I don't know. We thought maybe buyers, the broker, the buyer is also an agent. That was possible.
Yeah, thank you. That's it. Buyer is also an agent. Y'all, what I think about when I see this provision is that when y'all send us the commission agreement or instructions to closing attorney, a lot of times you're paying for a home warranty, or you're paying for an undisclosed HOA fee, or you're paying for part of a radon remediation or something like that. And the buyer and seller don't usually see that instruction to closing attorney. All I can figure is maybe they wanted to have y'all give an opportunity to put something like that in your listing agreement, but generally speaking, that isn't stuff you're going to know until you're oftentimes walking into the closing. So right. I'm not really sure exactly what this is going to be used for, or if it's going to be used very often at all. I'm very curious to see what y'all think about this, and if this is something useful to y'all or not.
Yeah, and there are a couple of comments in the features that I don't know how to answer it, and we'll probably have to, reconvene over on how to best use this as the year kind of goes on. But if you go to a listing this afternoon, you may not put anything in this section in C. And then D is separate commission on lease. I think you probably should put something. And it's one of those talking points where you say, look, I know you're not expecting to lease the property, but this market's a little different. And if you change your mind, just know that if I help you on the lease, this is what I would charge, 1 month's rent payment, that's the standard, or whatever it may be. And I'll have to share half of that with the co-op agent if there is one. So, these are just points. I always say, Zach, it's for prompting us to have the conversation. And in a sense, if we didn't actually have the conversation, we can at least point to the agreement and say, look, this is what the agreement says. How should we deal with it?
Yeah. Good.
The next thing they did add was this checkbox regarding consent to acts in dual agency capacity. And this is another one of those things. Let's have the conversation. You could have a seller that has no issue with being a dual agent. You may have a problem with being a dual agent, but this is where we can talk about it. Seller either does or does not consent to the broker acting as a dual agent. And honestly, what I would use this for is if the seller is adamant that it will not be dual agency, then we need to account for that in the commission and ensure that you have agreed to what the splits would be based on that scenario. If this is a ton of work and you're going to spend 2 years marketing this property and working with the builder, then maybe a typical 3 and 3 isn't going to cut it. And this is a good time to stop and have that conversation, get it figured out right at the beginning.
Hey, Christian, we've been requested by Lane to go back to item C. Can we see
Yep,
it?
right there, right at the top. There's that commission adjustment to cooperating broker.
All right. Can we make Lane a panelist maybe?
I can. Give me a second.
We'll get some clarification on this from Lane, because she's the one down in the trenches dealing with this stuff on a day-to-day basis. I think she's got some good information to share with us.
All right, Lane, you are welcome to talk. You just have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Awesome. So C is designed for the areas in our MLS systems in private comments when we see comments that say things like, if we show your buyer, we will only pay you 1%. And the history behind this is that agents were putting that in comments, but the listing agreement did not reflect that information. So the seller had not actually agreed to that language. And this now allows for that. We saw this a lot on ethics panels and also arbitration. When we requested a copy of the listing agreement, that language was not in there. That is why they have added this to the Georgia form.
Oh,
Lane, that's news to me, and I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'm happy to go back on mute.
So the next thing on there that obviously this is the part that I want, it didn't necessarily change too much. They adjusted some of the language, but number 7, seller has the following special circumstances that require third-party approval before seller can do the following: either list the property or sell the property. This is a showstopper. This is always something that you need to have that very frank conversation. Don't avoid the difficult conversation like I did in law school. Stop and ask, why are we selling the house? Is there an issue with bankruptcy, divorce? The other items they have on here would be short sale, seller not on title. Zach, I'm thinking of some others here off the top of my head, maybe probate, someone's passed away.
Probate was the big one that I saw that I didn't see on there. That's such an important one, Christian. And unfortunately, people die, it happens. And so, and y'all end up dealing with a lot of people that are executors of estates. Somebody that's taken the estate through a trust from that's resulted as a death as well. And, it's something most of y'all don't do every day. So it's confusing stuff. We can help you
with what you need if you have an estate sale, and figuring out what you got, what you need, and even put you in contact with the right people who can help you with the probate process if that's something that you need as well. Probate takes longer in Fulton than it does in Cobb. As a general rule of thumb, the bigger the county is, the longer the probate's probably going to take. But probate is probably the biggest thing I don't see on here that we deal with on a very, very regular basis. It can get very tricky, but it's something that Christian and I, we just deal with it so often. We're very comfortable walking.
Yeah, we really do. And it's gotten worse in this past 12 months. Anything that you have to get a court approval on, it's just taking twice as long or sometimes even more. I did a podcast, Zach, last year, and I called it Ambush Bankruptcy. Those are not fun. Do not be ambushed by bankruptcy 2 weeks before closing. Same thing with a divorce. And we're going to go over that scenario. I think it might even be next. Look at this one. This one's fun. So reminder, this is page 2 of the seller brokerage engagement agreement. So let me talk about this scenario. And unfortunately, this is all too real to Zach and I. At the listing appointment, the prospective client gave the agent a tour of the home. The agent noticed that some of the house was unfurnished, but it seemed normal given the intent to sell. While touring the bedroom, she further noticed that it was only half filled. Specifically, the closet was only half filled. The agent felt that this was odd and was concerned that the spouse had moved out, but never followed up on it. Importantly, she had checked the deed and the client was the only one listed. So only one of the spouses was listed. The listing agreement was signed, pictures were scheduled, and the property was marketed for sale a short time later. 2 weeks into a binding agreement date, let's assume it was a 30-day close. So we're halfway through the contract. The closing attorney called the agent and asked, and this is a very careful question, I will tell you, because I've made mistakes on how to ask this question. But the question is, can you tell me about the divorce and how that is being handled? Because I don't want to assume that you had no clue about it, even in this scenario where they didn't. They had no idea. Dreading this very call, the agent called her client and reality set in. The property was not going to close on time, if at all. Dun, dun, dun. So the question, where did she go wrong? Zach, where did we go wrong? What are the issues here?
She took the Christian and law school approach.
Yeah, don't ask the tough question.
She didn't ask the tough question.
Yeah, you can't assume too much.
And y'all, this is one of those things where, a lot of times you don't really know whether or not a divorce is going to be a big deal. And so 2 things on that. Number 1, you can ask your broker or ask us. Number 2, you can have us ask the question. Christian, we were just looking at that little checklist of special circumstances. Yeah. Just so y'all know, when we send out our seller info request sheet, as soon as we get a contract, we'll be in touch with your seller to say, here's a list of information we need. We need to know what, if you have mortgages, we need to know who's on title. And we ask those questions as well. We say, are you currently in bankruptcy? Are you currently going through a divorce? Is this a probate situation? Because we want to head that stuff off at the pass if at all possible.
Well, and then we ask again at closing, we make them sign a seller affidavit, basically warranting that there isn't a bankruptcy in some other state that we're not aware of, or they're getting divorced in Maine and the house is in Georgia. We may not know that otherwise. We need the seller to warrant that information back to us, just like you need it for yourselves.
Yeah, and I know that sometimes you're dealing with friends or family when you're going through this stuff, and it's very sensitive. And so a lot of times I'll have an agent reach out to me and say, listen, I'm a little wary about asking my brother-in-law about his marriage right now. Can y'all ask? And the answer is absolutely. We can help you figure out what needs to happen there. We can coordinate directly with the divorce attorneys to get the documentation that we need. Yeah. And so if it's a sensitive situation,
that's just a Monday for Zach and I. That's normal. So let us handle
that is normal.
That stuff. Right. So also in law school, one thing that I learned to do, and which really helps, if it helps you, then great. But I do what's called issue spotting. So it's a pretty complex issue. There's a lot of emotions. There's this whole sob story. but let's issue spot. What are the things that matter? And what are the things that we can just kind of put to the side and deal with later? So seller filed for divorce. That's an issue. Seller did not disclose the divorce. We haven't had any time to think about it. Will seller's spouse approve the sale? Does that even matter? And then spouse is not on that title to the property. So again, does this even matter? Let's look at the rules analysis. So also in law school, they make you follow up with the issue. They call it IRAC. That's the I don't know what I'm thinking, but thank you.
Acronym.
Thank you. So issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, IRAC. So the issues we spotted those out. Some of the rules, it says in the F-101 that sellers filed for divorce. But that language actually says any purchase and sale agreement will need to be conditioned upon the approval of the court having jurisdiction over the divorce. So it's not enough that the seller signs off on it. I actually need the judge to approve it. Number two, Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means that all marital property acquired during the marriage is subject to division. Highlight, bold, subject to, doesn't mean it will be. Subject to, possible, means that Zach and I, as we're insuring your transaction, don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Property brought into the marriage is not subject to a division or divorce. Gifts from one spouse to another are marital property if they were purchased with marital funds, or if that was their marital home, even if the husband owned it before marriage and then they both moved into it during the marriage, it's marital property. I'm sorry, it just is. And it's a problem. So we've got to stop and ask the tough questions. Ultimately, in that scenario, the seller could not convey clear title without getting the judge involved or some sort of approval elsewhere. We'd have to delay the closing when we did delay closing to try and deal with this. Or they could have allowed the contract to terminate. I think they were able to work something out with the buyer. Buyer receives earnest money back if they did terminate. Broker remedies are not available. It's just a disaster. Contract is just problem. No one gets paid. We don't get paid. You don't get paid. Seller doesn't get paid. Buyer doesn't get a house. It is pretty sad.
A lot of people's time and effort and energy is wrapped up in something like this, and it's just such a shame. And I think Christian mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it for a fourth time. In this scenario, the husband was on title by himself, and it didn't matter. Because of the way the divorce decree was laid out, the wife had an interest in this property, even though she wasn't on the title. So the agent had checked the title and saw just the husband was on there. So she wasn't, as worried about the divorce as she didn't think she really needed to be worried about a potential divorce. But it turned out to be a big problem because even though the husband was the only one on title, the settlement papers for the divorce said the wife was going to get something out of that property. And so she gummed up the sale.
Yeah, I had another scenario, Zach, where the husband was the deadbeat and he had actually fled the country. So they got in a divorce. The property was to go to the wife. Settlement agreement says everything, but he never came off title. He was still on title, but I think he was in the Middle East. Like he had gone, and we needed to know about that months in advance because we would need to go back to the judge to get the judge's, order taking him off title since he wasn't going to be able to do it. He was gone. It's one of these things that is a red flag, and the solution may not be apparent to you or me right away, but if we know about it, we can address it. If we don't know about it, we can't. It would be a major, major problem.
Christian, we just had a good question come across in the chat, so I want to read it. In a divorce situation, if sellers are divorcing and both husband and wife agree to sign the purchase and sale, does the agreement still have to have the court's blessing? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the status of the divorce. Depends on where they are in the process. Has the divorce just been filed? If so, we'll have to get the divorce attorneys involved.
Yeah, are there divorce attorneys? That's another big one.
Has the divorce been finalized for 3 years and now they're just getting around to selling the property? Well, if that's the case, we'll probably be able to pull the documentation that we need directly from the courts to take a look at those. But a lot of times, y'all, it gets really difficult because we have what we need in black and white print from the court saying what's supposed to happen. But it's 5 years old and circumstances have changed so much between now and then that we as the closing attorneys are then unable to follow the letter of those agreements. And again, we have to go back and get the divorce attorneys involved to figure out what goes on here. It's no fun. Makes everybody mad, costs everybody time and money. It's not something that we want to do, but it is a moving target for us. Divorce is a moving target for us, figuring out at what point are we, what documents are out there, what documents, if any, are still needed, whether or not we have to pull the divorce attorneys in or not, and a lot of times how amicable the parties are to one another as well.
Moral of the story, don't get a divorce. Oh my goodness. And it should be a red flag. So if it's something, your circumstances are going to be different. Andrea has a question as well, but raise your hand, ask us directly. Just say, hey, here's our situation. And then we can kind of help you in that regard. Zach, we're going to try and speed through the next couple of slides so that we don't fall too far behind. List price and listing period. They clarified the starting price and timing of the listing agreement. Again, this is one of those things that'll help a lot when inputting the information on FMLS and verifying that everything was done correctly. And then marketing, they added this language about the sharing of media and things that was also specified on that consumer brochure. A couple other changes. They retitled it. They clarified language of the commission being paid immediately. There was probably a lawsuit where the seller claimed that they didn't have to pay it right away, but that they had to pay it at some point. That's no help. So they've changed that. And then they updated terms regarding sharing commissions with co-op brokers. And that just gives us a chance to talk about kind of what Zach and I would prefer you guys do for us. If you have an unusual scenario on how commissions are being paid or how much commission is being paid, give us a heads up. Even if you don't have the instructions to closing attorney readily available and it hasn't been finalized, you should know upfront there's a broker bonus, it's a 4-2 split, or I'm only taking 1%, or I'm not taking anything at all. And just send that in an email. So when you send us the contract, let us know, hey, the commissions lists are a little different. Here's what they are, because we hate it when we disclose seller settlement statement without knowing that it's a different type of split or setup. So we don't want to put you guys in a bad position, make you feel like you haven't shared that with us, even if you're just waiting on the other broker to sign that instructions. So definitely, if it's different, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to assume it's 6% split equally.
And Christian, one quick point on that. Y'all, with commission agreements, instructions to closing attorney, I would say on average, about 50% of contracts that we close, closings that we perform, we have never received instructions to closing attorney on that.
Wow.
So it's something that's so important for us, so important for you. I can't tell you how many times, I would say once a month probably, we get a email or a phone call from an agent after closing that says, hey, y'all messed up my commission. This is what you were supposed to do and you didn't do it. And we say, I'm so sorry. We just assumed 3 and 3 because we never got a commission agreement from you.
I had one this week, Zach, where the agent actually admitted to me that she doesn't open the emails and verify the settlement statement ahead of time. And I don't think that should be normal. And I don't think it is normal. But when we send a settlement statement, say it's the day before or a couple days, I really implore you to open it and in the very least, make sure that we have the price, the earnest money, and the commissions put on there correctly, because a lot of it is just, we're going to default to what we have on record. So if we're missing Amendment 3 that changed the purchase price, that's going to affect commissions and it's going to make everyone feel like we're not paying attention. But look at it, be our second set of eyes, let us know when we've missed something, help us help you.
And we're not perfect either. We're not perfect. Sometimes we have a commission agreement and we still, have done 3 and 3 for whatever reason. So we need y'all when we're sending out those prelims to please, please, please take a look and make sure we are paying you correctly.
That's exactly right. So the next one that they've adjusted, they rewrote this for some clarity, which I think they did a good job. Protected period. There are 3 scenarios where the protected period adjusts. So it's not like a one size fit all. So in the event there's a unilateral termination, let's say the seller terminated this unilaterally. In that scenario, the protected period extends through the end of the listing agreement. Second is if both parties, the seller and the seller's broker, terminate it mutually. At that point, protected period is right then, it's cut off at the signing of that mutual termination. Third one is an expiration of the agreement. So at the end of the normal term, it cuts off when it's signed or only if it's signed with another broker. So really what I would probably recommend is not that you spend a ton of time on this, But when those situations arise, either you're signing a new listing and there was a prior seller broker involved. In that event, verify what that prior agreement said, whether it was unilaterally terminated, mutually, or just expired. That's important. And if you have to, call the other broker. There's no shame in calling the other broker to verify, hey, I know this was your old listing. Can you let me know what the status of your agreement is? I think that's the gorilla in the room in that scenario, because sellers will tell you anything to get you to work for them sometimes. And then the other one would be if your listing is expiring or something's happening to you, then we look at this, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us in that regard. I put this on here, the seller default. They rewrote this for clarity as well. It's really important to know when your seller is not living up to its responsibilities to you, responding to your calls, and what happens if they default under the contract. Really important to know what are the default scenarios. When is the seller in default with you? They also did exactly a section on third-party vendors. We talked about this when you're making recommendations of vendors, whether it's a surveyor or a handyman. This is, again, another time to sit and stop and say, hey, look, I'm going to give you a lot of references. They've always been good to me, but you're going to work directly with those vendors, and I'm not making any warranties about them. So that hopefully this protects you, but at the very least, it helps you have that conversation with the seller.
Yeah, Christian, I saw that change, and I thought about a conversation I had late last week with an agent. We were actually sitting in a closing, and she asked her buyer, she said, hey, who are you using for your movers? And this was a seasoned agent. And after the closing, I just said, do you not have movers that you recommend? And she said, I don't recommend movers anymore, ever. Every time I recommend a mover,
all movers
mess something up from one of my buyers, and I've just decided to take myself completely out of that equation and let them find their own movers from their friends or whoever it is. And I hated to hear that. I really did. But you get burned a number of times, and I guess that's what happened. But anyway, that language in the agreement now does give you all some good protection to say, hey, I may make a recommendation, but I'm not warranting this recommendation.
That's good advice. The next one was the buyer brokerage engagement agreement. Again, they changed the name of this. There's one part that is more important than the rest of it, and it's the first page, the most dangerously misunderstood section. This one is a landmine that if you're new, or if you've just done it a certain way, I'm going to try and get you back into doing it the right way. So we look at 4B. In the event seller does not pay the broker the full amount of the commission, buyer either shall or shall not pay the broker the difference at closing between broker's commission and the commission actually paid to broker at the closing of a contract to purchase. So if you put in 4A 3%, if that's what your expectations are, in B, you should always put shall, always. And it doesn't mean that you have to hold them to it. It doesn't mean that there's no option, no flexibility going forward. It just means that you have the leverage to demand being paid in the event a buyer goes and finds something without you, goes and finds a for sale by owner, or tries to just cut you out of a deal, even if they're doing it subconsciously. This is your ability to say, hey, look, my brokerage agreement with you says that you're supposed to cover the difference in the event the seller doesn't. And my broker is demanding that we figure out a solution. Blame it on Lane. That's what I always do. Does that make sense, Zach?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I don't know how you have this conversation with your buyer, but to Christian's point, we want you to check shell, and we also want you to talk to your buyer about this so they're not surprised about this if this does come up if this does become a necessary talking point at a later date. They're not like, why would you do this? Like, I never would have agreed to this. Why did you check this? And
yeah, I think it would be similar to like Zach and I having an agreement with your client that says in the event, you don't use one of our pens, you don't have to pay us. Like, why am I giving them that option? If I want to give them a discount, we'll do that later. But I hate that we even give them the option there.
Yeah, totally.
And then this is the next part of it. So if you look at 4B, seller normally pays commission. I love that GAR kind of puts these little tidbits in there, tries to educate as to what is normal. It's the most helpful thing in my toolbox. So in the event seller does not pay the broker the full amount of the commission, the difference in commission will be paid by buyer as agreed in section 4A or A4A. And then again, they have commission on a property sold for sale by owner. They're just reminding the buyer that, look, if you find something off market like this and the seller won't pay us, then we've got to work out something between you and me. And you're going to pay you're going to pay what we agree to. That's what, again, this form doesn't look a whole lot different. They've just kind of tried to clarify what this language is. They also have 2 disclosures I think are pretty helpful. And it's really a reminder to you guys. And it's also something you can use to remind your buyer in the event one of these scenarios came up. So there's the duty not to give false information shall prevail over a duty to a buyer. So you may feel like you have to do everything to protect your buyer and you can't kind of step up and raise your hand because you have a duty to them. Actually, the duty to not give false information shall provide. And then the next one, disclosure of potentially fraudulent activities, AKA mortgage fraud. So if you know your buyer is going to commit mortgage fraud, and that could mean anything. It could be lying on the loan application, or they just got fired and they say, look, I just got laid off, but the lender already verified employment. I'm just going to go sign and buy it. Your duty is actually above the duty to close. You don't have you have to kind of overcome that. And we also see this a lot, Zach, in seller disclosures, where you may have found out about something, the seller refuses to disclose it, and you feel like, what's my moral obligation? Well, it's in here. Your contractual obligation is to disclose that to the other side.
Yeah, if your seller knows that there's a pile of butylene pipes behind the wall in the bathroom that an inspector is never going to find, but the seller doesn't want to put that on the seller's disclosure, you're required to speak up on that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say to put your neck out there. I would just use that to convince the client to disclose. That's all I would think about. Let's take a little 10-minute break, Zach. Why don't we? Maybe we'll be 12 minutes. So we'll come back at 11:35, and we'll hit section 2 at some point. Steve Golden's going to be joining us, which I'm excited for you guys to hear from him. He's a great teacher. So let's take a 12-minute break. 11:35. We'll jump right back in this. In the meantime, if you want, you can go onto our website, campbellbrandon.com/learn. You can get it set up in your browser. And again, tell us that we are the greatest thing since sliced bread. But we'll start back up 11:35 and we'll get going. Thanks, guys.
See y'all in just a bit.
How do I? My live.
Good morning, Steve. How are you doing? Oh, I got you on mute. You have to unmute yourself again.
All right. Yeah, I'm good. Hey, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you as well. How's Alpharetta treating you?
Man, we're living the dream up here, the foothills of Alpharetta.
So you expecting, I was talking to Zach earlier about Buckhead, but anything big changes going on in Alpharetta, anything that you're seeing or kind of dealing with? I think you had a new attorney start with you, didn't you?
We did, yeah. Spencer Knott, and yeah, I think he's exactly what we need. He's got enough experience to not be dangerous. We can plug him into closings. He's a good guy. He's funny. He does a great closing, and he's enthusiastic. I mean, it's like a puppy dog. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. So, couldn't ask for anybody better. So
I love it. I love it. Well, Zach and I think the first section was really great. I mean, and I know you're a wonderful teacher. I've actually taken some of your classes, but I think I'm really excited to have you on this part because this is F201. This is
Right.
the mothership, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll just kind of feed in, so,
Perfect.
this is my first time, doing a class. I've listened on the other one. I didn't know how it all works. So I just kind of hung back and I listened to you and Whit, and y'all did a phenomenal job. So, I'm happy to just add, input, to everything.
I think that's an important part, Steve, because a lot of people assume that we have some like special knowledge about the contracts. And the reality is we just have to do it a lot. And I was telling them earlier that I actually print out a binder with all the materials and I'll after this next couple of weeks, I'll probably print out all the forms and just have it available because all the information to your questions are in the forms. And then through experience, we kind of understand how they all interact with each other. So
Right. Yeah. But well, going back to Alfred, everything's good. We had a great year last year, even though it was COVID crazy, and this year is still a little COVID crazy. And, we're excited, we're really excited. We're just ready to get back to some semblance of normal.
Awesome. I love it. Well, let's talk about F201. They did add a few things on the earnest money. And Steve, this is where I really kind of want you to chime in first, right off the bat. They added ACH, which I know I'm not thrilled about. I think it could potentially be setting our buyers in the wrong direction, but they added the ability for a buyer to send their earnest money via ACH. And we technically allow that as well if we're the ones holding earnest money. But the thing I worry about, Steve, is they then oftentimes will just want to do it the same way. That's just their mindset. It worked the first time. I want to do it the same way again for the down payment, for the closing portion. And that's a big issue. I mean, can you talk about that part maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm glad to be on board, the panel here. And, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Steve Golden. I'm the managing attorney in the Alpharetta location, and I love to teach, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this class and be on the panel with Christian and Zach too. So anyway, to his point, exactly. It's a big problem, if somebody sends their down payment as an ACH. Now, on the earnest money, it's allowable. You check the box, nice and easy. It was put in there, to be consistent, with what the forms committee had changed the previous year. And, so we have a separate account, so we can accept ACHs, and that's okay. But the big risk is that with the buyer's down payment, in the event that they do the same thing and they try to do it the day before or, in the day of, our escrow account, our general account where the down payment goes, automatically blocks ACHs. So, you have this no man's period of time where, the money is rejected, but it hasn't been received back by the initiating bank. And, we can tell when it's rejected. We don't know when the other bank's going to show it. And once they do have it, then they have to initiate a wire. So you can imagine the angst and the drama created by that. So, ACH for an earnest money, okay. But just remember, it's it can get crazy. Another, thing too is that we teach our buyers and sellers in rare cases to, avoid second set of wiring instructions. So guess what? We have a separate account set up, for earnest money. It's a separate set of wiring instructions. So of course, people are going to be really nervous about that. So, there's several issues related to it. But anyway, I hope
No,
that
you're
explained
right. I think if I were really to hold my client's hand and put him in the best possible position to have success, I would just talk to him, look, let's do the wire for the earnest money. Even if it's a little bit more expensive, maybe your bank charges $25, but do the wire so that you understand what that's like, what it means to have, whether your bank makes you go in person or if you could just do it on the app. And then when you have to do the wire for the closing, it's not going to be a surprise to you and you'll have it all planned out. So that's our opinion. We're pretty strong about that one. And its biggest issue is when we are the closing attorney holding the earnest money. And they clarified some of this language, but again, you guys shouldn't have to use this. I think your brokerage should always hold the earnest money if the other broker won't. But in the event there's no way around it, Campbell Brannon will hold the earnest money. Just make sure to include F510 and F511 in doing that. And then let's just further advise our clients to always send wires. This is the important contract. Actually, I'll go back. The title or the subtitle of this contract, of this section, important form, minor changes. So we're going to hit some of the things that are really, really important. Again, you'll notice on the bottom at 10, they changed the names of the brokers, buyer's broker and seller's broker. And I think that's a great change. It's just, let's all applaud that one for a second. And Zach and I talked about that one earlier too. Some of the changes, these are the summary changes. We'll spend a second on each one of these, but they updated prorations. They added language to inspecting the property. They have a disclaimer about flooding. We talk about risk of loss, survival agreement. I think that one's really good based on what Zach and I were talking in the first section about repairs. And then they added new language to the signature lines, which thank goodness they did. I hope it makes a difference. But Zach, prorations, this is specifically about property taxes. Educate me, Zach. Assume I'm an idiot. Is this important? Where can we go wrong? Is it always the same every time? And what does this new section mean? Why did they add this language?
Well, Christian, I appreciate you letting me make that assumption. Let's talk a little bit about taxes, everybody.
Jack, I was thinking the same thing.
Great minds. Taxes are one of the most consternating parts of our practice as closing attorneys. And the reason why is because we deal with so many different counties, so many different cities, and they all put out their tax bills at different times. Some of them put out their tax bills at multiple times a year, like City of Decatur. Their taxes come out in 2 different installments twice a year. City of Atlanta doesn't do that. So it's a lot to keep up with. And so let me just run through a quick example.
Look at this, Zach. I added these slides last night, so you haven't seen this one, but this one I put together just like a visual for you. But give us your example.
Okay, well, this is great. This is perfect. So in example number 1, January to May, I'm buying Steve's property. The tax bill for 2021 is not out yet. We need to have some sort of proration of taxes on the closing statement, so I'm not just at a loss for the portion of time that Steve's owned the property in 2021. So Campbell and Brannon is going to take last year's tax bill, the 2020 bill, and use that and base the 2021 prorations.
Yeah, but it's an estimate. We really don't even have much to go off of other than what it was last year.
Prior year's bill is pretty much all we got. Now let's fast forward a little bit. Let's say it's May 15th and I'm buying Steve's property. We may have a better option than last year's tax bill because more than likely the notices of assessments for the counties have all come out at this time. They are required to be out by July 1st, but most counties are getting them out in April and May. And what a notice of assessment does is it says we, Cobb County, Fulton County, DeKalb County, etc., we consider Steve's property to be worth X amount of dollars for 2021. Now, this notice of assessment is not an actual bill. And one of the things it says in bold at the very top of the notice of assessment is this is not an actual bill. So we appreciate that, but at least gives the closing attorney, the buyer and seller a little better framework for basing the prorations. So we're going to use that valuation from the notice of assessment for our prorations. Now let's fast forward to scenario number 3, which is closings that are happening late Q3 or Q4. Tax bills are out. We're really happy about this because we get to use the exact tax numbers for our prorations. This is the most exact way that we can do the prorations for a closing. The bad news is this is only for a small portion of the year. So
Yeah,
most of the
especially
time
in your
during the year,
county, Zach, in Fulton County, when did the tax bills actually come out last year? I don't even remember.
the tax bills came out a little earlier last year for Fulton than they have in the past few years. So the
Good.
the sanitary bills, and not every city and county has sanitary bills. Sanitary bills came out in July and were due in August, just like they were supposed to. Tax
Wow.
bills
Wow.
came out around the 15th of September. That was about 2 months earlier than they came out in 2019.
And 2018.
That was kind of an
ugly too.
unexpected surprise for us and a happy surprise for us that we got the tax bills in kind of what we would consider an on-time range of acceptability. I mentioned the sanitary bills a minute ago, Christian. We got the sanitary bills on time in July. In 2018, we didn't get sanitary tax bills. They didn't.
Didn't you get them the next year?
And so this is always a moving target for us. Most counties will say when they intend to have the bills out, but they're not held to that. And it's really just a guessing game for us when the actual tax bills are going to be issued for each year, for each county, and for each municipality.
Yeah, this is a big point that we wanted to harp on a little bit to try and educate you so that you'd have something to discuss with your clients. This is, if it's difficult for us, we know it's difficult for you and it's impossible for your clients, but this is a great opportunity to prove your expertise and try and kind of second set of eyes on settlement statements and kind of what the attorney is doing for taxes. Because I note a couple other unusual scenarios or things that would change this normal timeline. One, seller moved prior to January 1. So in that scenario, they've applied for homestead on their new property. And so we can't estimate based on last year's bill. We actually need a higher bill number. If it's new construction, when the new construction was completed, when the CO was issued, what the status of construction was January 1 matters big time, big time. Actually, Zach, I had a deal yesterday where last year's bill was $900. This year's bill, because the CO was issued right at the beginning, the house was almost complete. This year's bill, I think, will be about 15 grand. And not only are we worried about prorations, but we're worried about prepaids and escrows. And it's, there's a little bit of art in addition to the science. It's not perfect. It's an estimate. The last one would be a significant remodel. Steve's office, Zach's office, my office, we may not know about those circumstances, but if the county knows about it, then you better believe 2021 tax bill is going to be a lot higher, a lot higher. So this section was updated to include the fact that if it is just an estimate, that the parties agree to reprorate. That if we find out later that the bill was significantly different, that this language will help a buyer repro, or could even help a seller reprorate. Here's where that section is. This is page 2 of the contract.
Christian, real quickly,
Yeah.
If there's an estate, there's going to be a loss of homestead exemption as of January 1 because an estate can't, qualify obviously for homestead.
That's a good point.
So if we see an estate, where there's an owner who died, we may need to make an adjustment there. A partial completion, like you said, with new construction, or if it's a vacant lot. And, of course, the builders, want it no matter what, to be low. And of course, the buyers want it to be high because they don't want to have to chase each other. So, we have to spend a little bit of time analyzing this and using some common sense, and work with the tax office to kind of figure out what it is. On resales, it's pretty easy. One thing that I would caution you, though, is that, let's say that there is a senior exemption Sometimes I get in trouble for calling it a senior exemption, maybe a school tax exemption.
I think that's what the county calls it, Steve.
Well, they
I
do,
think you're
but
okay.
I was this 82-year-old lady, tried to hit me over the head because she said, "Sonny, that's not polite." But I told her I was just following, mainstream, what it's called. But anyway, the new buyers, we don't want them to get sticker shock. And so, it may be that the prorations are light, but the next year the taxes are going to be heavy. And, we need to make sure if they do have an escrow account, it's not going to be underfunded, because going forward, they're going to be, they're going to have to make up for sins of the past where, there's a, shortfall, and then they're going to have to build up for the following year. And that can be a hardship for some families. So, we got to be really, really careful. So guys, if your buyers are squawking, about, well, the escrow is higher and the proration's lower, that's sometimes the reasons. And just, let us explain it, back us up on it, because we're always trying to do it the right way to avoid a greater harm down the road.
Yeah, we even have this wonderful tool that we're going to be sending all of you. It's the tax calculator. It's an estimate form that we use. It's proprietary, but it's really great. You put in a purchase price, you put in basically your assessed value. It'll tell you, City of Atlanta, DeKalb County, what the taxes should be with homestead or without. It's a wonderful tool, and we can use that. But it's just it's a further tool that you guys can use to help build business and kind of help your clients. The next thing on here that I really like that they added.
Before we go on, can you go back, I think 2 slides where that language about prorations is blown up? Yeah, one more. There. Y'all, there's also a little bit of new language at the end of this section as well about who is responsible for paying for the tax bill. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to my scenario in which I'm buying that property from Steve today, okay? And I mean, I'm loaded, y'all. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, you're buying multiple properties this year.
Flush with cash. And so I am buying Steve's property for all cash. And so here's the deal. Steve gives me a proration at closing based on last year's tax bill. And then I am going to be charged with carrying the ball or taking the ball from Steve. And when the tax bill comes out, it's my responsibility to pay for that bill once it's issued. There is now language in the contract to specify that if a buyer buys property during a period of time in which the bill's not out yet, it is the buyer's ultimate responsibility to pay that bill once it becomes due. And if the buyer doesn't do it and the seller is damaged because of that, the buyer's on the hook for it. What does that mean? It means that if I buy Steve's property today, I pay all cash, or I have a loan that doesn't have an escrow account, I'm ultimately going to have to pay that bill. And if I don't, a lien will get filed and the lien will attach to my new property. But why is Steve going to be mad that that lien got filed? Because his name is going to be on it. Steve was the owner of record January 1 of this year. And so if a lien for 2021 unpaid tax gets filed, it's not going to be filed in my name as the buyer. It's actually going to be filed in Steve's name as the seller because he owned the property at the beginning of the year. Steve's not going to like that. It might even affect Steve's credit a little bit. So there's some situations where a seller can actually be damaged by a buyer not holding up their end of the bargain and paying that tax bill. And so there's now some language in there specifying who's supposed to pay the bill and what happened, and a little bit of teeth for a seller as well if the buyer does not pay that bill in a timely manner and a lien gets filed and besmirches the good name of Steve Golden.
Oh yeah, Steve. He not only he doesn't like getting hit over the head with old ladies or tax liens. That is for sure.
Right. It's bugaboos.
Yeah, the land baron, is turned out to be a deadbeat. Now it's affecting my credit. That's not a good thing. But yeah, that's exactly right. You want to make sure that you explain to astute sellers, especially that question that what happens if the bill doesn't get paid by the buyer? Will it affect my credit? And the answer is potentially. But fortunately, there's some language added in there, as Zach said, that gives some teeth. Number one, to have an acknowledgement as to who pays what and what happens if it's not paid. And of course, the buyer would indemnify the seller for any and all loss resulting from the breach of contract. So anyway, good point, Zach. Thanks for rewinding us a little bit.
The next thing that they added on here, right to inspect the property. The thing that they added was great. So it says, upon prior notice to seller, buyer or buyer's representatives shall have the right to enter the property at buyer's expense and at reasonable times. including immediately prior to closing. So there's your walkthrough scenario. But this part's a little different. So to inspect, examine, test, appraise, and survey at buyer's expense and at, survey property. This right to enter shall include the time period after the end of any due diligence period, among other things, and without limitation, meet all these contractors. So I kind of stumbled over my words a little bit, but you have the buyer has the right to inspect the property even after due diligence period. And this is put right into the contract. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. In fact, Susan actually brought this up in the chat. She says, well, what happens in the event the buyer just overuses this and just burdens my seller with wanting to come back and back and back? And honestly, they have the right. They do have to be reasonable. They do have to ask for prior notice or give prior notice. And the seller shouldn't unnecessarily, withhold that right. But if you have to, we can do a special stip, or we can add it into the amendment to address concerns, just stating that the buyer shall be limited to revisit the property to 2 more times at these dates and with 72 hours prior notice. Like, we can account for that. Maybe you have to kind of learn that during the due diligence period and then add it in. But the other scenario would be if you know after meeting with your seller that this is always going to be a problem for your seller, especially during COVID, we can account for that ahead of time. We can put some of that stuff in the original contract, just kind of remodeling what this language does naturally, or what it does by default. We also added, they added a disclaimer. They put in some additional information about flood. And actually, we're going to talk about flood in this 3rd section. So I'm going to just kind of speed through this. But again, it's a disclaimer regarding the property's propensity to flood. This is a part I really like. I like talking about this section, is risk of damage to property, or what I always called it, risk of loss. And Steve, I don't know if you knew this about me. I grew up in Southwest Florida. We have these things called hurricanes. So this has always been a big deal in Florida. It was actually a big deal in Georgia this year on Halloween when that hurricane came through. Did you lose power during that time? And what was your experience during that? What were some of your clients' issues?
Oh, well, power loss, of course, was an inconvenience to say the least. And of course, trees, coming down was probably, the extent of the damage. Homes, to a degree, were hurt, but not,
that's good.
They were, but they weren't destroyed, as indicated in here, as you would get more in South Florida, where I have some family too, Pompano Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Tamarack.
Yeah, and so this language basically puts the burden on the seller in the event a big storm were to come through and a tree falls on the garage, or even maybe there's a fire. Hopefully it's nothing serious, right? So it says if something were to happen to the house, the seller is responsible for fixing it. The seller is responsible for bringing it back up to snuff. And it's as of the offer date. So last year in this class, the 2020 changes class, the GAR, they changed the piece from under contract to offer date. So it's as of the property when the offer was originally made. So let's say, we're right after due diligence now, that big storm comes through, a tree falls down, or maybe the pool cage is ruined, or a fence comes down. This is saying the seller shall deliver the property clean, free of trash, debris, and personal property. Let's see, except for the changes, I'm skipping through it. The part they changed, notwithstanding the above, if the property is destroyed or substantially destroyed prior to closing, seller shall promptly give notice. So this is the second part of that. The first part says seller's responsible, seller shall bring it back up to what it was before. And then the second part is, but if it's destroyed. Now, last year, Zach, this language didn't say destroyed. It said if this property is damaged or substantially damaged. And I actually had a problem. I'm curious what your take on this would be.
Yeah, destroyed or substantially damaged is what the contract said last year.
Oh, thank you. So
and substantially damaged, I think, was kind of the gotcha language in there. And I'm afraid that substantially destroyed maybe end up being gotcha language in here this year too, because what the forms committee struggled with, and what so many people struggle with, is what does substantially damaged look like? What does that mean?
It's pretty vague.
And so it's too vague. And so I hope that by going to destroyed or substantially destroyed, that's going to be a little bit better,
Yeah.
smell
I think it's better. I think it's better.
What this means, but I mean, there were just a lot of arguments that were happening over a buyer saying, hey, this has been substantially damaged, and a seller saying, look, a tree fell on the fence. This is not substantial, on a chain link fence. This is not substantial damage. I can get this thing fixed lickety split. Maybe not by closing, but very quickly regardless. So we were having arguments about that. So this is raise the bar a little bit as to what kind of damage you have to sustain before you can really invoke this provision.
I agree. It's the scenario I had last year, $2 million property. In one of the inspection moments, the buyer actually identified that the basement had a major leak, that, there was a crack in the foundation, and it was going to cost maybe like $40,000 to fix this damage. And the buyer was really freaked out, because what this language says is if the property was substantially damaged, then the seller, upon giving notice, could actually terminate the contract. And they were worried that the seller was actually going to do that the seller is going to walk away, not fix it. And just, they wanted this property. And in this scenario, the seller, there were other things going on. The seller kind of wanted out of the deal. But I think if that same scenario happened in 2021, on a $2 million property, a $40,000 damage is not destroyed. I would think it isn't. And hopefully that will protect some of those weird scenarios. But they did make this change. I think it's probably for the best.
Hope so.
Let's hope so. So there's your risk of loss. One thing I do want to make a point of is if we do have a big storm or a fire or something like that, I think the buyer should consider re-inspecting the property with a professional. Obviously, it's going to cost more money, but in Florida, we learned all too frequently that in a big storm, 100-mile-an-hour winds, things crack, things bend, things break, and the layperson may not notice it. I certainly wouldn't. And doing a quick walkthrough for an hour may not be sufficient, but an inspector come back out or a roof expert come back out could be money well spent. That is for sure. Survival language. I think this is a wonderful addition. So Steve, it says the following shall survive the closing of this agreement. Obligation of the party to pay real estate commission. We like that one. 2, any warranties of title. That's great. 3, all written representations of seller in this agreement regarding the property or neighborhood in which the property is located. 4, the section on condemnation. 5, obligations of the parties regarding taxes. We talked about that just a little bit ago, and it kind of follows through with the idea that survives closing, that the buyer and seller agree after closing to reprorate if necessary. And then 6, any obligations which the parties agree herein agree shall survive the closing or may be performed or fulfilled after the closing. What do you think of this one, Steve? You like this change?
Yeah, I do. I like number 6 because, let's say that there's a repair, that's not completed, let's say that a window was ordered. However, it's not going to, it's not going to be available until after the closing. It basically states that, that obligation shall survive closing so long, as it's agreed to by the parties. So, when we're dealing with repairs, we're dealing with, lack of options where you can't escrow money, amendments are really, the key there, but you have to add that magic language in there. And that would be, that would coincide, with number 6 and the survival of agreement. If you do not, add that magic language, under Georgia law, it's called merger with the deed. So in other words, when the deed is conveyed, all other obligations go away. And so, you want to make sure that if there is an obligation, that, you put that magic language in there, and this backs it up, that the parties agree. If that language is in there, it certainly will survive closing as well as 1 through 5.
That's great. I love it. Yeah. And Lane asked a question. So if there's a loan, do you have to disclose this to lenders? Is that right? Yeah, I think that should be the norm. Everything should be very transparent. It's all in an amendment. If something needs to be done after closing, then it's going to survive closing. I think if we try and overthink it and not share things with the lender, or if a lender saying, hey, don't send that to me, it's going to be at your client's detriment. And that's not the way to do this. So, if the parties are going to do that without your knowledge, that's one thing, but actually hiding things could put you in some real trouble there. And litigators would always recommend if you're going to do that stip, like Steve said, throw this language in, this shall survive closing.
Right, right. And guys, be really careful with that because, depending on what it is, it could affect the value of the property and almost, it could affect, the valuation too. So you're looking at, potentially mortgage fraud. So, always disclose to the lender, even if, certain parties are trying to dissuade you and the big stuff, such as, water intrusion, mold, wood rot, those things, I mean, need to be fully disclosed. And you know what? You may not be able to close on time, but at least you're closing the right way. You don't want that trailing liability. And I've seen a lot of things go south. For the sake of time, we're not going to go on all the stories, but, just suffice it to say that, as Mike Campbell says, they're firing with real bullets. And if something goes wrong, it could be used against you. So always do it the right way. Light a date, get it to the lender, whatever, they drive it. So whatever they need, you need to follow, and we'll help you with that. We'll back you up. We can come up with solutions, but it's got to be ethical, compliant, and under the light of day.
Yeah, the three of us, we really like being creative. We like helping your clients in those scenarios, but we're always going to say, go talk to the lender to make sure those scenarios are available. So I agree, Steve. That's very good advice. They're firing with real bullets. This is the next part they added. So this is the language. I like this change. By signing this agreement, buyer and seller acknowledge that they have each read and understood this agreement and agree to its terms. I don't know if that's going to make a difference, Steve, but I like that. It's right there, right where they sign. Hey, you actually read this. You're not relying on the agent to explain every nuanced scenario, that you've actually tried to understand it yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's in bold. It's, it's open and obvious. It needs to be there. People, for whatever reason, as smart as they are, we've closed, PhDs, physicians, attorneys. When it comes to, real estate contracts, we call it doofus. Doofus enters the building and they say, well, we didn't know that was in there, duh. And, they don't want to be held accountable. It's human nature. But at the end of the day, if you sign it, you're purported to have knowledge of what you signed. And I believe there's some case law where a blind man signed a contract and was held accountable, even though he didn't have the physical ability to read. So, have your clients read it. The overarching principle is, they're acknowledging that they've read it, but yeah, let's take it a step further. How about they actually look at it, read it, and understand it? They don't need to read all the boilerplate. You can give them a summary, key points, but they need to understand what they're getting into, and they are purported to have knowledge of what they signed, and they're held accountable for it. And they, you just don't want it to come back on you.
Yeah, that's really great advice. The scenario I had about 3 weeks ago was there was a special stipulation. The buyer was a broker, and the buyer had negotiated that the commission would come off of the purchase price. So trying to get a discount on the actual purchase price. But the seller, and actually not even the seller's broker, just had the lower purchase price in the contract already. So they had the lower number in there by, I think it was $1 million property. So now the property is $970,000 purchase price. And then they added in a special stip that was really confusing, but essentially it said that the buyer broker's commission shall further reduce the purchase price by 3%. So the buyer's like, all right, it's not 970, it's 940. It's another 3% off of that purchase price. And the seller's like, that's not what my broker explained to me. And the broker was freaking out. And the seller actually admitted to me, I didn't read it. I just trusted that the broker did it correctly. That's not an excuse. And you'll feel terrible. You'll blame yourself, and you'll feel like you have to waive your commission to cover the seller's loss, and that maybe their family. Not an excuse. And this just is another reminder, hey, just so you know, I need you to reread those special stip. I do my best, but I want to make sure that you are okay with what you're signing.
Exactly. Yeah. Their first, view of the agreement, in my opinion, shouldn't be when they're being asked to DocuSign, or whatever the format is.
Right.
It should be, in my opinion, sent separately, reviewed, tell them to take a peek at it. I know, it's a tight market, and the velocity of deals needs to be faster, but you want to get it done right. So, taking the time, ounce of prevention is huge. So calm your clients down. Let's take a look at this. Then I'll send it to you in DocuSign. Let's get it done right. And, because, we don't want to rely on the due diligence or, lock us into something that, we didn't know, we didn't look at, would be very disappointed. So anyway.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a tough one. The next part, I wanted to remind everybody that there are different contracts based on the type of property that you're buying. So F201 is essentially a resale contract. Basically, the house existed before, now we're reselling it. It's the one we use the most often. F210, F213, many of you may never have used this or may never use it in the future, but those are specifically for lot deals and then a land deal. And I kind of want to explain the difference between those. If we think of houses, the things we worry about: termites, warranties, encroachments, improvements to the property, building or zoning violations, possession, is there a tenant in the property, things of that nature. It's an actual house. What are we actually buying? Who lives there? But on a lot and land deal, there's no house. So my mindset, all the attorneys' mindset changes drastically. And the contracts, I'm not a huge fan of F210 and F213. I think GAR does a better job on F201. But these contracts, they think about zoning, utilities, sewer and water access, have the sewer taps been paid, things like that, permitting issue, environmental studies, maybe topo surveys, maybe a soil test, things like that are the things that the attorneys are going to think of that would need to be done. And Zach, you talked about this earlier. Is it a buildable lot? And that could mean any number of things like utilities or access or things like that. But yeah. Zach, can you talk to the new construction contract? How do your mindset change? What are some of the different things on new construction contracts using F228 or even just a builder contract?
Well, I was going to say, Christian, I agree with you. I don't really like the GAR new construction contract, and the only thing I like even less than that is builders using their own contract. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. The only thing I'll say about the F228 or the new construction agreement that I like is that I know it a lot better than I know a random builder contract, and I do find that the GAR contract is a little bit more buyer friendly than obviously the builder's own contract is going to be. And not to go too far down a rabbit hole on this, but y'all, if you have a buyer who's going to buy a new construction property and the seller builder is using their own contract, man, I really would encourage y'all to get somebody to review that contract on behalf of your buyer to see if any changes need to be made. These contracts are generally speaking, so builder favorable. I mean, just a couple of quick examples of things we see is basically a builder being able to delay the contract unilaterally.
Indefinitely sometimes.
Indefinitely.
Ooh. That's
a dangerous combo. If a seller can unilaterally, indefinitely extend the contract closing date. That's just an easy example of something that we see on a very regular basis in builder contracts. So don't expect a buyer to be proficient in reading and understanding these things or negotiating them. In a lot of instances, it's going to be a very difficult thing for even the most seasoned agent to understand the pitfalls of some of these things. So reach out to us on this type of thing, or reach out to somebody you trust that's qualified to review, alter, and negotiate this type of thing. Because
that's great advice, Zach. When I'm hired to do these types of reviews, I typically I'm not trying to change the contract because a lot of builders won't permit that. It's more of an education. What is a construction deposit? Is the seller actually using that? Is it something that's refundable? Completion dates, certificate of occupancy. What does it mean when they get the CO? Is it a complete house or are there still a punch list? And the contracts all have this language in there. Some of it also is just custom and what is normal for these transactions. They did add to this new construction contract that the seller has to disclose the insulation and R value because there are minimum standards, and then there's what this builder is actually doing. So that's an important part in these construction contracts. It looks like an F201, but I promise you it is very, very different.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Christian. When I'm reviewing one of these contracts that a builder's got, the majority of my notes are just read and understand as section 6.1. And if you don't understand 6.1, let's circle up and talk about it. You know, it's a lot less about changing the contract itself and a lot more about just making sure the buyer understands what they're getting themselves into. Exactly. Can we talk about one more thing, 2 slides back, Christian, on the CO? Sorry, 1 slide back on the CO. So a little bit of language has been added here in section D, basically saying the construction, where does it say? Seller shall complete the construction of the improvements.
Substantial.
Here it is. Shall be deemed. The construction shall be deemed to be complete when seller has substantially constructed all the improvements shown on the plans and when a CO has been issued. So in the past, it's just said CO, but now it says they have to have substantial completion of the plans as well, which is good. It's not great, but it's good. And it's good because in the past, builders were just basically getting a CO, waving it in the buyer's face and saying, hey, I got this, you got to close now. The drains weren't done. The tile work wasn't done in the kitchen. The door jambs weren't correct. But, you know, a CO basically says you can live there. It does not say everything's complete.
It's safe, yeah.
So you can live there safely. So this substantial completion language is a good addition. The reason I say it's not a great addition is because there are still going to be arguments over what is considered substantial completion. And I hate to be critical. I don't have a better solution than this necessarily, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. But something we've been recommending for years on new construction contracts is that you build in some sort of window of time between when the CO is issued and when you have to close, be it 5 days, be it 10 business days, be it, you know, whatever it is that you want to choose that your buyer feels comfortable with. So once that CO is issued, you then have the ability to go back in that property and say, hey, the shower tiling's not quite done. Hey, some of the caulking's not quite done. And we want this stuff done before we close, rather than doing this, you know, this exercise we do so often of a punch list item that's going to quote unquote survive closing, and that the seller promises that they're going to do after closing, but so oftentimes does not get completed.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. One thing that happened to a client of mine maybe 2 years ago was they had paid maybe $50,000 in upgrades to the property, specifically on finishing out the basement, cabinets, granite, some sort of built-ins. Like, it was really going to be beautiful, but the builder hadn't completed it. The CO was issued and builder was forcing the buyer to close. And now we had to deal with, well, that money has already been paid. What do we do here? How do we kind of account for the fact that these cabinets have not been installed? Yeah, it gets complex. So you go under contract, we don't even think about upgrades, but then your buyer decides, all right, we're going to do some upgrades. Let's build in how those things are going to get paid for, whether they're going to be done prior to closing or not. Let's handle that right up front. I mean, Zach, you seem pretty passionate about it. I agree with you. This is a big deal because it is different. New construction is different.
Right. And to Christian's point, most builders won't negotiate, especially in a market like today. Now, in 2008, it was different. You know, a builder, if they got a buyer, you know, whatever you want in the contract. Now, today, not so much. And, you know, it's very wise to have trained eyes on these new construction agreements because, you know, and I think to Christian's point, you've got to educate, you know, what your buyers getting themselves into, performance, construction deposit versus earnest money and the risk there. No appraisal contingency, no financing contingency period. They're going to be pressured with incentives to use, you know, a particular lender and also closing attorney that, you know, they'll insure over just about anything just to get the deal done because they know that their bread's buttered, you know, with that particular attorney, which may not be in your client's best interest. So, you know, those are the things that we need to have a conversation to not only, you know, drill into the contract and have some proposed changes, but to educate your client, because if it is so egregious, you know, and, you know, the builders say, well, you can trust me, I'm a good guy, I'm a good gal. Well, not necessarily. I mean, we need to look to the agreement We need to see, what's agreed to, and, educate, your client. There is a fee for that. We charge an hourly rate, but it's worth every penny. I've helped a guy, recently, where, the construction deposit was about 250,000, which, is significant. And I said, I explained to him the difference. We were able to get half, as earnest money, which is more protected, and the other half is a construction deposit, which
That's
can be used
great.
by the builder for anything. And that limited his risk to a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what the solvency of the builder is. What happens if the builder passes away? You could end, or the builder files bankruptcy, you're an unsecured creditor. So, at the end of the day, these are really challenging, deals, and I recommend us to review it if at all
I
possible.
think that's wonderful. I've even seen where you do a waterfall. So 50,000 after permitting is pulled, 50,000 after the foundation, 50,000 after the roof, whatever it may be. But it's that way. If we get halfway through, we realize the builder is not doing a great job. Yeah, we've lost some money, but not the full construction pot. Yeah, it's awesome, Steve. I love
Right.
that.
Milestone disbursements. I like it.
So the next one that you're going to see a lot, I mean, this is on almost every deal, F249, counteroffer to or modification of the unaccepted original offer. And again, Zach, this is where I said it several times already. Gar hit a home run. They're trying to educate your client as to what it means and educate you as to what it means to counteroffer. And so let's read section A. The party making this counteroffer acknowledges that in doing so, 1, it constitutes a rejection of the original offer as presented in all previous counteroffers. 2, the original offer and all previous counteroffers are no longer available for acceptance. 3, no previous counteroffers shall be considered as a part of this agreement between the parties. And 4, nothing requires the other party to continue the negotiations. What does that mean, Zach? I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Let me pause here. I love that they're going in more detail to explain this, because it's so important and it's so easy to get tripped up on. If Christian makes an offer on Steve's property and Steve counters Christian's offer, Christian's original offer is dead. It's gone. It has disappeared into the void. And that means that, let's just say, here's a great scenario. Christian makes an offer on Steve's property. Okay.
Steve, $1 million. It's yours.
Awesome.
Steve says, not even close. Not going to do it.
I don't think he said that. I think he just said
awesome.
He wants
I'll
me
take
to
it.
close in Alpharetta.
That guy will insure over anything.
You got it. That's why the builder sent me the business.
So Christian makes the offer to Steve. Steve counters the offer. And then for whatever reason, Steve finds out that he's in financial dire straits later that afternoon. And he's like, I want that $1 million offer so bad. So Steve retracts his counter offer and says, sorry about that counter, Christian. I'll go ahead and accept your original
Do the deal, Steve. That's what he said.
Yeah. No deal. So it's gone. Christian's original offer is vamoose. It no longer exists. By countering Christian's original offer is gone and no longer available for acceptance, even if Steve retracts his counter. So the only thing that Steve can do at this point is have a new contract written up and present that to Christian as an original offer.
And you can see maybe with a buyer's offer being, revoked, maybe that's not as big of an issue. But if the tide was turned, let's say Steve's trying to sell me his property and he's willing to sell it for the $1 million as long as I close in Alpharetta. And I say, no, that's not going to work for me. It won't be at your house. It won't be at mine. Let's do it at Zach's in Buckhead. And so I counter offer. And then Steve gets an offer for $1,050,000. Even though it was just this minor change of where we're closing or the date or whatever it may be. If Steve can go and accept that higher offer, and that was the risk we saw a lot in 2020, where the market was changing so fast that by counter offering, sometimes you were letting another buyer sneak in there and offer more money. That was a big deal. The other thing they added C, effect of accepting this counteroffer. This is more education to the party accepting. So when this counteroffer is signed by the buyer and seller and a copy of the same is delivered to both parties, the original offer as modified by this counteroffer constitutes a legally binding agreement. I think we knew that. Since this original offer, including all exhibits, is incorporated by reference into this counteroffer, only this counteroffer needs to be signed to create a legally binding agreement between the parties. So to clarify, the prior counteroffers are not part of the agreement. So anything that was in a prior counteroffer would have to also be in your final counteroffer. But all the exhibits that were part of the original offer do get incorporated. So you could have a scenario where the original contract, F201, is signed only by the buyer, and same with all the exhibits. They had 10 counteroffers, and only the 10th one, that's the one that applies. So it's the 10th counteroffer and that original F201. All the other stuff doesn't matter. So we put some practice tip at the bottom. Signing this counteroffer incorporates all the previously included exhibits. But if an exhibit is being modified, include that in the counteroffer to also be signed. And then, Zach, occasionally you'll have the other agent say, look, you need to sign all the exhibits. And need versus want, if it's easy to sign them, go ahead and sign them. If it's part of the contract, it's part of the contract. But contractually, you don't need to sign all those exhibits. They're incorporated automatically.
Yeah, we've seen kind of smaller brokers that quote unquote require that everything be signed on an original offer. We've also seen lenders that require that.
Totally.
And so my advice on that has been to say, we'll do it on the day of closing.
I love that. That's great advice. Look at that, Zach. They also added this same language from F201
yeah.
by sounding
really
this counteroffer.
This language this year. I love it.
It's great. That one's great. So obviously we like that. F289. I don't know what to think of this one. So it's called Request for Confirmation of Presentation of Offer / Counteroffer. So you can imagine the scenario. You don't think the seller agent is presenting your offer to the seller, that you're not getting a response, and you're like, look, just confirm to me that you actually presented it to the seller. And so they've created this form, F289. It references the rules and what National Association of Realtors also requires from an ethical perspective in Article 1, Standard of Practice 1-7. And it just reminds everybody that, hey, if you're given an offer, even if it's not on a GAR contract, it has to be presented. And I say, I don't know if I like this one, because look who signs it, the broker. And if the broker's willing to lie to you to your face or on the phone, maybe they'll be willing to lie to you here. So Steve, I actually have a proposed solution to that. There's another form, and it's always been there. It's called the Notice to Reject an Offer or Counteroffer, and it's F288. So you could make a process if you've got an agent that's kind of bugging you about it, where you give notice that you're rejecting an offer. So you get 5 offers, on 4 of them you sign F288 saying, we are rejecting your offer, and it just kind of closes the loop. I don't know. What do you think of this one, Steve? Have you thought much about it?
Sounds satisfying.
Not satisfying.
No, sounds satisfying. The F288 sounds satisfying.
Yeah, I like F2. I like them both. I mean, Lane just, chatted and said, it just holds, the agents to a higher standard. And I like the rejection, one as well, because, what I know you guys hear this too. It's a small community, and agents get upset when they just learn, through the grapevine that their clients lost, and they didn't hear anything as to why or
tough.
So I think it closes the loop. It's good communication, and I like the idea of F289 just for that reason. I mean, I think Lane's right on point that it holds them to a higher standard, and so I think I'm not super excited about it, but at the end of the day, it does serve a purpose. And, when appropriate, you have that arrow in your quiver and use it, especially if you have a client that's like, did they truly make that? Or were we rejected? What happened? Can we get in backup position? So anyway, I think both forms are good.
One thing I like even better, F290. This is a new form, agreement to reinstate the contract. So let me give the background on this one. So historically, Many attorneys, a lot of litigators would caution against reinstating a terminated or failed contract due to the risk involved if it wasn't done properly. This form should relieve those fears and can be used if the parties are able to resolve their previous differences or reasons the contract first failed. I make a little note on here, be careful, if not recently terminated, you may want to just start over.
Correct.
I like this one. And I think some of the issues would be, well, how do we incorporate any changes? How do we make sure we're referencing the contract that we're reviving? Consideration is something that us lawyers would worry about. Only nerds would think that, but it's really important if it ends up in court. Zach, I asked Steve on the last one. I'll ask you on this one. F290, you in favor of this one? I like it.
Yeah, let me give a scenario on this one where I think this could well come into play. Christian has made an offer on Steve's property. Steve has accepted this time.
I've got the money in today's scenario.
They are under contract. Due diligence days are ticking away. We're now at, where are we? Wednesday, January 13th, and due diligence is going to expire at midnight tonight. Okay. Christian has some concerns with the property that he would like to be addressed. Steve is in the Bahamas.
Oh, I was going to say Cabo. Yeah.
Already spending the money that he's going to make on Christian's gracious offer. And Steve is not in a place where he can respond to Christian's due diligence amendment to address concerns. Okay. And so time's going to tick and it's going to tick and it's going to tick, and Christian's going to get nervous. And finally tonight, Christian's going to say, I can't go forward without this stuff being addressed. Yeah. Let's pull the cord. I gotta send over my unilateral TNR.
I think that's reasonable too, by the way.
Good.
I don't. I was busy.
So Steve gets up and clears the cobwebs out of his mind tomorrow morning in the Bahamas, getting his Mai Tais out of his system, and he checks his email, and he's got 17 frantic emails from his real estate agent saying, we got to respond, we got to respond, we got to respond. Here came the termination. And Steve said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I missed this. What Christian was asking for was not a big deal to me at all. I totally would have done that. And so the agent says, hey, maybe not to worry. Let's just use the F290, reinstate this bad boy. Okay. And so Steve then has his agent put together the 290 that says, hey, this contract was terminated last night, but we are reinstating it. The timelines are going to stay the same. If there are any changes to the agreement, they can be outlined in change 2 or in item number 2 that we see there before. And then you can just move forward. Y'all, for years, Campbell and Brannon has provided what we call a Lazarus special stipulation that effectively did this same thing. And so we're so glad that the GAR committee has taken this out of our hands and written a great form that addresses this type of situation. Now, one thing I did want to clarify. Let's say that Christian sends that TNR, okay? And he wakes up the next morning and says, you know what? I think I was taking too hard of a line last night. What I was asking for really isn't as big a deal to me today as it was yesterday. So I'd really like to just continue on with this contract. So let me just send this F290 over to Steve and let's just keep that contract moving along, okay? Well, if Christian has sent the TNR and it's a unilateral TNR, he does not have the right to unilaterally use the 290 to reinstate the contract. He has to have the seller sign off on that F290 to have the contract revived again. So this is not a unilateral thing that you can use. Both buyer and seller have to agree to use the 290 to move forward.
That's exactly right, Zach. And in fact, this is almost a separate agreement, sort of like the due diligence period. So if you look up at the top, it shows that there is separate consideration. Number one, states mutually agree. It has to be mutual agreed to. Number two, if there's any, needed modifications or wanted modifications there that are mutually agreed upon, and then number three, it's only effective when signed, by buyer, and seller, and delivered appropriately based on the notice requirements. So, it's 1, 2, 3, again, the bold language down below the reported out of knowledge, but 290 is a great addition, and it may come in handy, from time to time. Cold feet, lack of communication, whatever it may be. But just know that we like it, and we endorse it. We think it's a good thing.
I agree. All right, so let's look at F301. They made some minor changes on this one. They updated systems and components again. They continue to make that a better part of the form. Water heater age was added. And honestly, this is a really easy question to answer because it's right on the water heater usually. And then they modified some of the termite language. Again, Gar hit it a home run on this, trying to educate clients as to what the expectations are and how this form should be interpreted. So definitely have your clients stop and look at this. But one thing I want to share, there's an issue that comes up a lot where the seller doesn't live in the property, whether it's probate, investor, maybe it's a rental, fix and flip, who knows? Maybe they bought in foreclosure and they will refuse to sign a seller property disclosure statement. Before we get into how to handle that, let me show you a couple of things. If we look at this first page and we look individually at each question, can a seller who never lived in the property actually answer these questions? You be the judge. 1A, when was it built? B, is the property vacant? C, is the property or any portion thereof leased? Has it been designated historic? Is there an HOA? Lead-based paint exhibit? All that stuff, you don't have to live there. In fact, a lot of it's pretty important. But we understand, right, Zach? A lot of our investors say, will not sign it. It doesn't get disclosed. We put some sort of special stip saying seller never lived there. You're buying it as is. Then they came out with this form. This is new for this year, F302. I'm very hopeful for this form. Zach, what do you think? How should we use it?
I mean, Christian, one of my biggest concerns is one that you just touched on. You've got an investor who's saying, I'm not giving any disclosures on this thing, okay? So we've got two problems there. The first one is what's addressed on the front of this form, which is the latent defects, okay? So once again, we know about the polybutylene that's behind the wall in the bathroom, and an inspector's not gonna find it, but your seller knows about it. They're required to disclose it, whether they want to give a seller's disclosure or not. Georgia law requires that they disclose latent defects. Polybutylene that they know about behind that wall is a latent defect. They got to disclose it. Number two, that I like a lot. Can we go to the next slide, Christian? One more. Yeah, the seller's checklist. Y'all,
isn't that great?
If you're selling it as is with no disclosures, how do you know what does and doesn't stick with the property? This is a huge problem that we've seen for years and years and years on an as is, no disclosures contract standpoint. So I'm thrilled to have this form that lets your seller make any disclosures about latent defects. And to me, I don't want to say more importantly, but equally as importantly, a fixtures checklist so they can decide what does and does not stay with that property. I think this is huge to protect both the buyer and the seller. So I'm absolutely very, very, very happy that this form has come into existence.
Yeah, I would think your standard would be F301 should always be signed. If your client's going to fight you on it, F302 is our backup. It's great. It's awesome.
Right. And guys, this would come in, to play where you're dealing with an executor or a trustee, especially a corporate trustee, step one, acknowledgement that, hey, you're responsible for latent defects. And if you know of any, you put them down. But, in an executor or a trustee scenario, maybe more importantly, what remains of the property, what's checked, and have your buyers look at that because they may not understand, how that works. And so if it's checked, it stays. If it's not checked, it probably ought to be negotiated. If it's gone, potentially. So, you don't want, a disappointed, buyer, where the basketball goals removed, where the kids wanted it, because it wasn't, checked. And anyway, so
that's a great point, Steve. In fact, I was going to further what you were talking about, which is now you're on the buy side. The seller is still refusing to fill out this form. We need to do a step. We need to say that all fixtures and appliances shall remain with the property, including the basketball hoop. That would be a no-brainer. If your seller is not going to do that, let's protect the buyer. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. But it's a great form. I'm happy about it.
Yep. Me too.
F316 lead-based paint exhibit. We talked about this a lot last year. And in fact, this class, we talked about the fines that come with not doing this disclosure. It's significant, but practically speaking, most agents make offers before doing the inspection, before thinking about lead-based paint. For that reason, the form now says that the buyer has waived that opportunity of inspection before going into contract. So here's where it is. This is the part they added. It is section E. Buyer has, and you have to initial either 1 or 2. My suggestion, our suggestion, I don't see a scenario where you're going to checkbox Roman numeral 1. You're probably always going to initial Roman numeral 2. Waived the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. You know, we're going under contract first. We've got our due diligence period, hopefully. Waive it.
Christian, can we give Elaine the microphone for a minute again?
Yeah. She chatted that she had a question. She wanted to be unmuted.
All right, you just have to unmute yourself, Elaine. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So here's the question. Hi, Steve.
Go dogs.
Go dogs.
All right,
Here's
calm
the
down,
question.
everybody, please.
So our counter offer form says that all exhibits are agreed upon and attached. But in asking for clarity, the lead-based paint form to be in compliance with the federal government requires us to have this fully completed. Am I correct on that?
The lead-based paint exhibit?
Yes.
Well, by agreeing to the counteroffer, it does incorporate this, but if the buyer still needs to initial it, this is the buyer shall. So it probably does need to be completed.
So in the investigations that we have seen in Atlanta, the companies that did not have it actually completed were fined. And so it conflicts with what our counteroffer says. And so my advice, knowledge, and opinion has been to our agents, that is the one form that is the exception to the counteroffer form. And I just wanted to make sure that is what you guys understand.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Federal law trumps whatever contract we have here. There's a federal disclosure requirement. We have to make sure that we comply with it or risk, having that issue. And you also make a good point that in compliance, brokers have been hit by this. And it was part of what we talked about earlier on these counteroffers. If the compliance officer for the broker, if it's the other broker even, if they're going to require that this form be re-signed due to past experience or that knowledge, we should just comply. We should say, yeah, let's re-sign it. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. I want you to be happy. And this is a good reason why you would have that mentality.
Lane, do y'all ever put it like a special step on a counter that says,
that's correct.
Standing the foregoing, you got to sign the lead-based paint exhibit, or everybody's got to sign it?
We haven't. We have been successful when we go to the other side and just remind everyone that federal law trumps what our contracts say, and that we're not willing to risk. It's an $11,000 fine.
Yeah, per contract.
It's actually per
incident.
Per incident.
That's right.
Yes. So it is a very, very expensive fine and form that's critical. So we've just taken a real hard stance on this. Our compliance manager, bless her, she's on this today, gets a lot of pushback, but we stay true to getting this totally completed.
So, Lane, feel free to circle us in anytime on that if it's helpful too.
Okay. Thank you.
So we are now going, we've got about 20 minutes left on this class, guys. And I know attorneys are full of hot air. We could talk forever. We're not going to hit the third section on this class, but that's okay. This is the most important part. Let's spend the next 20 minutes making sure we stand on our soapbox and educate everybody as the importance and the downsides of not filling out the community association disclosure, because it changed again, guys. It changed again. Luckily, the way we interpret the form has not changed. This is more of a formatting and clarifying type scenario. And we're actually going to do a little case study. The last section, which we're not going to hit, I did a section on flood zones, which you can read the materials. You can download the materials. I put the link to it in the chat box. The last one is our interpretation of what it means to be closed. And it's a really good case study on that as well. I definitely recommend you look at it since we're not going to be able to. But
correct. Hey, Christian, that's, guys, you're not missing out. That's our filler in case it went short.
don't tell them that, Steve.
But with 3 attorneys, it's always going to go a little long. So we don't need, plan B. We'll stick with plan A.
This is the good stuff.
Quality filler. Quality.
Yeah, quality.
Yeah, it's
all right,
quality
so community association disclosure, F322. We updated some language to reflect the amount due annually. They added some new subsections. Let's jump into it. This is what the form looks like. It doesn't look a lot different, but they kind of changed. Page 2 and page 3 kind of flip-flopped. And we're going to look at that in a second. Yeah. And really what we're looking at is this 3rd page right here. Fees paid at or prior to closing. All the other stuff, you're going to have your seller fill it out. They're going to do their darndest. They're going to tell us what they pay annually or monthly or quarterly. They're going to say if it's voluntary or mandatory. They're going to talk about special assessments. But the part that it impacts every property with an HOA or a condo is page 3, section 3, fees paid at or prior to closing. I'm stopping for a dramatic effect here. One trick that we learned in this is you have to read it in order. Start with A, go to B, go to C. Don't just skip A and B and go right to C. You have to read it in order. And let's talk about why. We're actually going to skip right to the case study because this goes into detail. I'll set us up if you don't mind, and I'll let you guys kind of talk us through it and tell us how your offices handle it. But here's the scenario. Prior to the binding agreement date, the seller contacts his HOA in preparation of listing the property on FMLS. The HOA states that there is A, no initiation fee, and B, the closing letter is $300. Honestly, step 1, seller did great. That means the seller broker, good to you. You educated your seller to go and call the HOA and get an itemization. Furthermore, after that, the seller fills out F322, as a good seller should, discloses the information as provided by the HOA when a binding contract is signed shortly thereafter, putting $300 in section 3C in regards to the closing letter. We'll go over where that is. After binding agreement date, but before the end of due diligence, this part is meant to distract you from the real issues. Seller texts and emails the buyer when they discover the additional fees. The buyers acknowledge receipt and the agreement continues without a termination.
Don't go for the head fake.
At closing, seller is irate. This is not an exaggeration. Seller is irate when the HOA discloses $650 initiation fee, $300 buyer move-in fee, $150 elevator deposit. The closing attorney places these fees in addition to the closing letter on the seller, and seller refuses to close unless they are rectified. Oh, so those issues, right? Who pays? That's the issue. Who's going to pay? All that to say, how should this work? What does the contract actually say? Zach, talk to me. What do the rules say? What does the contract say? How do we interpret this?
Well, I mean, what the contract says is anything over and above what the seller disclosed is going to become a seller fee. And what I hate about that is, y'all, this scenario happens probably once every 2 weeks in our office. I don't know how often it happens in Steve and Christian's office.
A lot.
And, you know, it says seller pays, right? Y'all, so often the agent pays. And the agent pays because they want to get the deal done, or the agent pays because they actually filled out the community association disclosure on behalf of their seller, which
no, say it ain't so, Zach.
You can't do. But y'all, I mean, I would say in our office, our instructions to closing attorney change most often because of this exact scenario and an agent saying, you know what, I'll just pay this. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want y'all to pay for this kind of stuff. So, you know, as Christian, you know, kind of emphasized, we don't ever want you filling out this stuff on behalf of your seller. But whatever you can do to lead your seller horse to their water of truth for what the HOA fees are going to be, please help them do that, because y'all, I just feel like y'all's commissions get held hostage for this stuff day in and day out. And I just don't want that to happen to y'all.
That's right. So here's your form. Section A, disclosure regarding fees. Owners of a property in communities where there is mandatory membership are obligated to pay certain recurring fees. Fees can and do increase over time, and on occasion, there may be the need for a special assessment. Again, does GAR need to include this in the contract? Maybe not, but they're trying to educate a buyer and seller, both parties, as to what is normal, that this is common, and they do go up. So let's look at B, 3B, account statement or clearance letter. This is usually step one. Seller shall pay the cost of any association account statement or clearance letter, aka closing letter or estoppel letter, something of that nature, including all amounts required by the association or management company to be prepaid. So not only is there a letter, but there's some sort of other fee that is included in that. We see that most in condominiums, I would say. They're going to make us pay that in advance. Within 2 days of notice of the closing firm, seller shall pay for this closing letter as instructed. Seller's failure to follow the instructions may cause the delay in closing. Again, education. Now let's look at 3C, transfer, initiation, administration fees. And we're really just looking at the rules here. Buyers shall pay any initiation fees, capital contribution, and whatever they call it. Seller warrants, that second paragraph, seller warrants at closing that buyers shall be required to pay no more than blank for all these fees. Seller shall pay any amount in excess of this sum, even in the event of any later disclosures. There was the little piece that we're going to learn about. All transfer, initiation, administration fees paid by seller should not be considered seller closing costs. Contribution. D is fees and special assessments. Seller shall pay those occurring before, or buyer shall pay those occurring after. And then E, this is an interesting one that I haven't spent a ton of time on, but buyers shall pay any prepaid regular assessments due at closing for a period of time after closing. These shall not be transfer, initiation, administration fees. Also, move-in fees, including fees and security deposits to reserve elevators, shall not be considered these fees. So basically, the buyer has to pay those. So the question, who pays for all these different fees? So let's look at them one by one. Steve, the closing letter, who pays the closing letter? What does section 3B say?
Well, 3B says that the seller shall pay the closing letter, and that's part of their obligation to provide clear title. So, we need, confirmation from the HOA that there are no unpaid HOA dues and special assessments, because you may not find a lien filed, in the real estate record. So that's why the seller pays that. And then real quick, I know for the sake of time, a lot of the HOAs are requiring certain typical buyer fees to be paid up front by the seller to obtain a closing letter, which we need, for them to clear title,
Like
right?
a new account setup fee or something.
Oh, well, we've even seen the initiation fee up here, being collected, and,
Wow.
the seller assumes, that they're going to be reimbursed. And in fact, the forms committee, to, eliminate that, disparity or ambiguity, basically stated, unequivocally that the seller shall not be reimbursed, so keep that in mind, and also who the seller gets their information from is very important. If it's, concierge or, somebody that, knows somebody in the HOA, that's not good enough. You might want to have them obtain a letter up front. Those are just really important points, because, the live bullet things really comes into play almost, weekly here, where, the HOA, is requiring certain fees to be paid up front. And the seller pays them, thinking that they're going to get reimbursed, and they're not.
Yeah, shall not be
information.
reimbursed. Obviously, you could do a workaround, put a special stipulation: buyer shall reimburse seller for closing letter up to a certain number, something like that. You could easily overcome that, but that has to be stipulated. The next item on there, super easy answer on this one: $300 buyer move-in fee and $150 elevator deposit. 3E makes this pretty clear. Buyer pays those fees even if they were not disclosed. But practice tip, Steve, you mentioned Mike Campbell earlier. He says disclose, disclose, disclose.
Absolutely right. Yeah, so, even though it's not required, go above and beyond.
That's right. Zach, I'll let you hit the hard one. Initiation fee. How do we approach 3C? How does this system work? They put a number in there. Obviously, it wasn't enough. How does this one work out?
So this is one where the buyer has to pay the amount that's been specified by the seller, and then anything over and above that is on the seller's dime to pick up.
Correct.
That's right. So in this scenario, here's our result. Seller pays the closing letter, $300. Buyer shall pay the move-in and deposits even though they weren't disclosed. That's $450 total. Buyer is going to pay $300 of the initiation fee because that was what the number was in 3C. And then the seller is going to pay the rest, the $350. So actually, before I get to that question, let's think about this. And this is the point I really want to drive home. Nobody is happy in this scenario. Nobody, because the buyer thought they were going to pay maybe 300 or maybe even zero. Maybe they read some of the form and they thought, all right, I'm not going to have to pay anything. And they come out having to pay the $450 prepaid stuff and the $300 of initiation fee. So they're out of pocket $750. The seller is irate. I already explained that. They thought they were maybe going to have to pay the closing letter, but would get reimbursed. That's what they tend to think. And they're having to pay $600 out of pocket. Their half of the initiation, or $650, I guess, $650, $350 of the initiation and $300 closing letter. So seller is $650 out of pocket, buyer's $750 out of pocket. It's just ugly. It's really a shame. And we feel as strongly as you guys do. But the most important thing, I've said it several times this class, this is normal, Mr. Seller. This is normal. Everyone struggles with HOA disclosures. May not be your fault that the HOA misled you or didn't disclose. It is your problem. So there's a difference there. And that really can diffuse the situation a little bit because, Steve, as you know, they tend to sit at the closing table, say, well, I'm not closing. That's right. What they say.
That's right. Yeah. I had one fellow who was on the HOA board and he was fussing about the clearance letter fee. He said, I'm on the board and I wasn't aware of this and I'm not going to pay it. And then the agent said, well, heck with it, I'll pay it. And he's like, nobody's paying it. And I said, sir, let me show you where in the contract is. He says, I'm literate. And I said, well, I'm not questioning your literacy. I'm just trying to solve a problem here so we can move off center. I mean, $800,000 deal. And he's, arguing in front of everybody over $150. It was like, give me a break. Come on.
Yeah. Now. Anytime they bring up principle, we know we're
principle. It's the principle of the matter.
Zach, here's the issue, but the buyer redisclosed after they went under contract before due diligence. Buyer had the option to terminate, didn't. Doesn't that change? Doesn't that change it?
Well, just like the seller's disclosure, Christian, a seller is required to disclose new information if it comes to light after the binding agreement date. But a seller is held to their representations on the Community Association disclosure exhibit as to what they disclosed on the binding agreement date, not what they redisclose later. Now, if a seller rediscloses and a buyer says, hey, I knew there was going to be an initiation fee. I'm cool paying that initiation fee. Fine. We're happy to put that on the seller's side. But short of a buyer saying that, a redisclosure does not get the seller off the hook for the lack of disclosure or improper, inaccurate disclosure that they put on the CAD that came over on the binding agreement date.
Yeah, they tend to make it our fault. They say, Steve, the buyer knows about this and they agreed to pay it. And so what I don't know how you deal with it, but I typically say, if the buyer can send me an email saying they'll pay it, I'll switch it over. And guess what never comes? An email from the buyer.
Yeah. And where the initiation fee's been, where it's been required to be paid up front by the seller, at the end of the day, it hits the table and everybody's upset. I said, guys, we can amend this, and if we know about, people being upset ahead of time, we can work with the parties, but at the end of the day, we have to follow the contract. If they want to deviate, so, I had two back-to-back deals, one where the initiation fee, even though it was the seller's obligation, the buyer said, the heck with it, just amend the contract, I'll pay it. The seller was arguing what's in the CCRs and that doesn't matter. What matters is what's in the contract. And I had another case where it was about $2,000, maybe $1,500. And the buyer said, well, Steve, like you said, we have to follow the contract, so, they got a little bit of a windfall, but I mean, literally I had 2 deals back to back, not even connected with each other. And, they had different results, but, and another point too, guys, if you see something that just doesn't look right, our advice is, pick up the phone, call the other agent, try to avoid the drama and the train wreck. I mean, let's play fair out there. Don't take advantage of something that's, a noticeable error. I mean, it's for everybody's best interest to get that handled up front. I don't think you're doing your client any disservice by being honest and, pointing that out. So I think we can all agree, be ethical, and work together as a team. So we have, a better experience for all.
I put a stipulation in this that I'm not thrilled with. I think we probably need to adjust it a little bit, but it says, due to difficulty defining the exact cost of the HOA, buyer shall pay and reimburse seller for any and all HOA costs at closing, including undisclosed fees, closing letters, move-in fees, and special assessments. The thing I would add is say this shall override the requirements otherwise stated in F322. If you have parties that agree to all that, you could easily put that type of stip in there and override it. The difference is the contract doesn't say that normally. So the other scenario, just put a big number in 3C, and in the very least, buyer will pay everything but the closing letter, something like that. But you have to be careful about who you do that with and how much you put in there. If in this scenario, the seller had put $1,000 in 3C, and then you just call the buyer agent and you say, look, I put 1,000 because we were having some trouble talking with the HOA, but I really think it's only going to be this $650 initiation fee. In that scenario, buyer's only going to pay what the actual fees are, and seller has a little bit of cushion in case the fees were to go up or something like that. It may not be the scenario you use it for. I've seen it. I have seen it done that way.
Right. The last point too, guys, make sure the seller understands if they sign that, they're making a warranty. And, so we've had some cases where a seller said, call yourself, don't know, where they wrote that in, or, 0 or NA, anything like that doesn't matter. Really, I mean, they need to, make the call. They need to understand, they need to fill it out that they're making these warranties, and the buyer needs to see that so that they can make an informed decision. They can contemplate that, in their offer. And, we just need to play fair. Use the form right. I would say if you use too big a number in there, 15,000, you might scare away a buyer, and the form's not being used for its intended purpose. Just have it, do it the right way every time. And if there's a specific concern, give us a call. We can help you, either, come up with a special stip or something, that, will, make everybody happy.
Love it. Any last thoughts, Zach? Anything you want to share with the good of the crowd?
Steve gave the last thought. I'm going to give a last thought. Christian was running down the changes that are in the CAD this year. One of those changes is that once the seller receives instructions from a closing attorney on how to pay for that letter, how to pay for that HOA letter, the seller has 2 days to pay for it. I love this change, and I'm hopeful that this is going to be a part of our common closing vocabulary now, that when you as a listing agent see that email come across from us or from the closing attorney, that you can now say to your seller, hey, you got 2 days. You got 2 days to pay for it. What we don't have is teeth telling us what happens if they don't pay for it within 2 days, but I'm just hoping this becomes common practice, that we said that everybody involved says, okay, you got 2 days, so get it done within 2 days. That'll help us all head these issues off at the past that we're talking about that come up on the day of or day before closing with undisclosed fees.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you both. I thought that went spectacularly well. Again, we did skip section 3. I definitely recommend you download the slides, look at the 3rd section that we put together for you. They have something on flood zones, what it means, and how you approach it as a buyer agent or seller agent. The last one is, how do we coordinate these closings where buyer and seller are in separate rooms? What is our recommendation? What's our advice? And what does it mean to be closed? It's a great form. I think, Zach, you probably talked to this group in a sales meeting about it. So that's kind of why we're not worried about kind of moving over it, but it's super important information. Steve, Alpharetta, wish you the best of luck. Zach,
Thank you.
Buckhead, wish you the best of luck. Obviously, I'm in Cobb County. If you need us, you know where to find us. But thank you so much, everybody. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you
We
for the
need to-
opportunity, to allow us to teach.
We need to remind folks, I think, that if they've not been on here for 180 minutes, that they need to keep their call open for 180 minutes, right?
That's right, Zach. We're going to suggest you just stay on. We're all going to be kind of turning our video off, but go ahead, stay on. We'll keep the class open for those who got in maybe 5-10 minutes late. If you had IT issues and you had to log out, log in, just stay on. There's no way to verify exactly how many minutes you were there until after we've closed the class out. So if you can, if you need to, stay longer. But it would be, if you logged in 9:55, you're welcome to leave now. You'll be fine. You've got the full 180 minutes. But the last thing, campbellandbrandon.com/learn. That's how you fill out your application and ensure that you get credit for the class. And Danica, thank you to you in advance, because she's going to be reaching out and verifying that each of you do get credit. And be patient with her and with us. It may take a couple of weeks for us to get everybody. We're teaching a lot of classes this week. So thank you guys. Best of luck. Don't hesitate to call.
Thanks for your participation, folks.
Yep. And hey, guys, if y'all have any need, whether it's pulling a deed or a special stipulation or, any contract question, you can reach out to either one of us, or you can go to attorney or attorneys at cb.law, LAW, attorney or attorneys at cb.law. We have 30-something attorneys now. Heck, I'm losing count. But that email goes to all of us. First available will say, got it. And we try to be accessible. On the weekend, we've got a deed pulling guy named Mike Campbell. So he'll get you that deed really quick, so you can make an offer, or know who the owners are. And of course, we can help you with special steps. Anything that comes up, that is your family to us. We want you to have that resource available. And, but the last finishing statement is, guys, read these contracts. These classes are great. We give you, a summary of to what the differences are, but, understand reading these forms, ferreting out questions you might have, you'll be able to identify issues, either handle them yourself through your broker, or, you can give us a call or email attorney@cb.law. So, you have resources, to get those contracts tight and keep these deals together.
Thanks, guys. Signing off.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, y'all.